nor to the man he chose for me to marry. It's not about the arranged marriage, if that's what you're thinking, Melissa my dear. I love you. Conrad pleaded, making him sound so much like a certain hidden weapons master. But I don't love you. I never have. Ranma stopped laughing as he turned about and listened in on this drama, which was more humorous than amateur night at the holy shrine. He snickered every now and then as the two reminded him of shampoo and mousse. But I think you will come to love me, Melissa my darling. Conrad insisted. For I have changed my ways. I have given up being a magician and enlisted as a soldier, so that I may become the valiant champion you so desired. Don't make me judge a book by its cover, Conrad. Ranma snorted at her statement. What a hypocrite. She judged me the moment we met, and now she's giving these holier-than-thou lessons to this dope. Besides, I've already found the champion I am supposed to serve, Melissa stated as she began walking toward Ranma. Those words caught the magician martial artist's attention. Hold on. She didn't say what I think she just said, did she? When he saw her approach him, he swallowed hard, as all thoughts of laughter left him. Oh no. She doesn't mean. She can't. No. 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 Melissa took Ranma's arm and held him close, as Conrad looked on in total shock. This man is my chosen hero, the priestess said with pride. Almost people could tell it was to convince her unwanted suitor to leave her alone. What? But he's a magician, not a true champion. Conrad's world began to crumble about him. He is the one in which my God my lead had chosen for me, so you will have to just go back to Ranworth and... No, he cannot be. Conrad protested. He can't possibly compare to my good looks, my lawyer legs and my ability to compose beautiful poetry. He's just a commoner. Ranma was just getting over the shock of this sudden reversal, then looked at Melissa with a glare. He said to her in a very hard whisper, "Don't get me involved in this. Quiet. You're not much better, so just play along." Melissa hissed. "Oh, so that's how it is. Well, maybe I should just dig out my best clothes for when I'm invited to your wedding." To him. Ranma stressed. The priestess blanched as she realized that Ranma was her only escape from a fate worse than death. She then forced out a smile and nodded. She then spoke through her teeth. "Can't you just help me out, please?" "Well, since you asked so nicely," Ranma said sarcastically, then turned his attention to Conrad. "Well, I'm afraid that Melissa here can't abandon her duty to her chosen hero. Sorry. No, no, no. This cannot be true. How can you be her valiant champion?" Conrad cried out, sounding more and more like Moose. That made Ranma even more disgusted. Man, he's even more pathetic than Duck Boy. Hey, I didn't want the job. Ranma shrugged. But like Aunt Jenny says, I'm her chosen hero, and that's that. So I guess you should just say goodbye and... No. This cannot be. I challenge you. Say what? This declaration caught everyone by surprise. I challenge you to a duel of honor and of love. For my darling Melissa, Conrad stated. Huh? Ranma was really confused at this point, and irritated that this was an all too familiar scene. Now why would I want to fight somebody like you? I really don't like to pick on the weekend. Ranma will accept your challenge. Huh? Ranma looked back at Melissa after her sudden acceptance to Conrad's challenge. And if you win, then I shall leave the Temple of Miley and return to Ranworth with you. But if he wins, then you will never again bother me. Agreed? Now wait just a minute. Ranma couldn't believe this was happening. Here he was, minding his own business, then all of a sudden, he was being roped into a duel as Melissa and Conrad started pulling this chivalry crap. It had been bad enough when he had to accept all challenges at the Tendo Dojo, no matter how moronic the challenger was. And why was he always the one who had to cover everyone else's sorry butts? Didn't he have any say in this? Conrad snorted at Melissa's terms, since he was certain that he would be the victor, especially with his secret weapon. Fine. Does your chosen hero agree? Or does he intend to hide behind his magic wand instead of facing me like a man? Conrad's last barb got Ranma's hackles rising. Though he wasn't as headstrong or as reckless as he was in his first life, he still didn't like to be called a coward. When he looked back at the girl holding his arm, he got another insult to his courage. You will accept, won't you? You'll fight for my honor? The priestess asked with some expectancy. All depends on whether a know-nothing know-it-all's honor is worth fighting for. Ranma growled. Are you a coward? Are you even a man? Melissa asked in a none too gentle tone. Ranma's son let off a tired sigh as he bowed his head, while pinching the bridge of his nose with his free hand. She just had to pull this chivalry nonsense. Kami-sama, I should have seen this one coming. He muttered, then looked back up at his would-be opponent. He paused for a long moment before nodding. Fine. I accept. I could use another good laugh. Then it is settled. The Ranworth knight stated as he took out his sword and pointed its blade at his soon-to-be adversary. In 1 week, we shall duel and I shall take my bride back to Ranworth. He then resheathed his sword and began to strut toward the front gate of the temple. However, those who were watching him leave noticed that he was breathing hard and his steps began to falter. Ranma snorted as his earlier assessment of Conrad had proven to be correct. That wimp was seriously out of shape and all that pretty armor was just for show. It looked like that suit of metal was seriously weighing him down. When Conrad saw that people were watching him, he tried to make it look like he wasn't struggling, but he wasn't fooling anyone, least of all his opponent. The magic-using martial artist sighed as Conrad left. He really didn't want to fight him. It wasn't out of cowardice, but out of disgust. He gave the Miley priestess a harsh glare, which made Melissa cringe a bit. How dare she involve him in a problem that she was afraid to solve herself? Then his expression softened a bit as he remembered a scene in his past, in which he had done the very same thing with Akan, when Kodakai Kuno had taken a fancy to him. He supposed that when dealing with idiots who couldn't take no for an answer, it seemed that only physical means would be required to convince them. So be it. With another sigh, he shrugged off Melissa's grip on his arm and began walking toward the gates. Shin followed closely behind him, with Ula tagging behind the Rune cat. Ranma, Melissa called out to him. She was feeling a little guilty over the entire affair. The martial arts sorcerer did not look back to her as he simply said, "I'll see you later." As Ila and Ranma strolled through the streets of Ophan, the young sorceress became a little worried. There was no doubt in her mind that Ranma could defeat that pompous jackass Conrad in a fair fight, but she had a feeling that Melissa's unwanted sweeter wouldn't play by the rules, especially with what she had noticed at the Laughing Swan. Like Ranma, she wasn't convinced of the Remeliarth Knight's claim to being a noble warrior. "Ranma, are you alright?" "Yeah, it's no big deal, Gila-chan. I mean, it's not the first time I got roped into a fight that wasn't any of my business." He let off another sigh as he stopped to pick up his cat. Shin meowed as he perched on his master's right shoulder. That was so unfair. Melissa had no right whatsoever to get you involved. You don't have to do this. Yeah, I know I don't have to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Why? He took on an introspective look as he replied, "Well, as much as me and the know-nothing know-it-all argue and stuff, I can understand her situation with Conrad. Conrad's the type that lives in his own fantasy world, and anything that doesn't fit by his rules is usually ignored. Either that or he rationalizes the truths so they become lies to fit his way of thinking. I've had a lot of experience with those kinds of people. Boy, have I had a lot of experience. Simple logic won't work, so the only other option is to pound the truth into them. But that might not be enough." Gila pointed out. "Yeah, well, it's still a lot of fun trying to pound some sense into them. I need to work off the stress." Ranma smirked. "In any case, I've got a weekend. I need to find out something. Did you notice? Oh yeah. It was kind of hard for me not to see it after he issued that challenge in my face." At that moment, his stomach rumbled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten yet. "Come on, Ila-chan, let's go get some dinner." "But what about all food you made disappear?" "Hey, I'll save that for a snack." Later, at Jeannie's cabin, the group was gathered together to discuss the upcoming duel between Ranma and Conrad. With the exception of Meryl, everyone was present. Currently, the martial artist was leaning against a wall with his arms crossed. As far as Ranma was concerned, the fight was already decided with him as the victor. Surprisingly, Melissa was in complete agreement. "So you don't think this Conrad person isn't someone to be worried about?" Jeannie asked as she and the other girls sat on a bed. Melissa let off a confident sound and smiled. "I may not have seen him for a long time, but I am very certain about his skills. Ranma shouldn't have any problem in defeating him in a duel. Nothing like a fixed fight with a sure winner, eh? Ranma commented sarcastically. At that moment, Meryl came bursting into the cabin. She was out of breath and very agitated, as she tried to tell her friends as to what she had seen. "You're kidding. Conrad can actually fight," Jeannie exclaimed in surprise. Though she hated to admit it, she and Ranma were of the same mind that Melissa's sweeter was no threat. "I saw it with my own eyes. He took out 5 men all by himself. I've never seen anyone swing a sword like that," Meryl stated. "I hate to say this, but I think that he's just about as good as you are, Jeannie. He's a master swordsman." She then looked over to where Ranma was standing and expected to see him cringing in fear. That would be worth seeing after all the hell he put them through. However, Ranma chuckled at her and shrugged his shoulders. "Well, if he's only as good as Ms. I can't fight without a weapon, then I definitely don't have anything to worry about." "What? Why you?" Jeannie got up and grabbed for her sword, but Melissa stopped her before things got violent. She then gave her chosen hero a disapproving glare. "How could you be so uncaring? Didn't you hear what Meryl just told us?" "Yeah, so what?" Ranma shrugged again. "I've beaten Miss Swordswinger without even working up a sweat. Mister, I think I may knight won't be much different. But this isn't just a fight. It's a duel, meaning that you have to use swords. You can't use any of your magic. So what's your point? Do you even know how to use a sword?" Maybe. Well, I haven't used a sword in a while, so I may be a bit rusty." Melissa began to panic as she saw an image of herself, walking down the aisle, with Conrad waiting at the altar. No! She couldn't marry him. Ranma must win. He had to win. She began to regret ever setting those terms to the duel. "Hey, it's no big deal. I'll admit that I'm not Miyamoto Musashi, but I think I can get by." "Who?" you asked. "Forget it. In any case, I've got to go check something out, so I'll see you guys in a week." "Kamila-chan?" His childhood friend nodded as she and Ranma exited the cabin, leaving Melissa in a very agitated state. Though she wanted to be supportive of her friend, Jeannie smirked at Ranma's confession. So there was something that Ranma wasn't an expert on. The streets of Ophon. So this is where Meryl saw Conrad fight? Ranma asked as they stood near a pub. "Yes," Gila replied. According to her, some ruffians were trying to take advantage of the waitress, and that's when Conrad showed up and fought them off. "Okay." He reached into his tunic and pulled out a spell scroll. He nodded to Shin and began chanting. "Jinmen, Jikyu, Dukeryu. Jinmen, Jikyu, Dukeryu. Jinmen, Jikyu, Dukeryu." Gila watched in fascination as the spell scroll unrolled itself and floated before them. Ranma had told her in his letters that he had been developing a new kind of spell casting. She did not recognize the markings on the slip of parchment, but she did notice that he wasn't using his new wand as a medium. She looked down and saw Shin's eyes glowing brightly as the rune cat channeled his energy into the parchment. Then her eyes widened as she beheld ghostly images appear before them, as if history had decided to repeat itself. She immediately recognized the image of Conrad as he faced off against 5 unruly brutes. Towering nearby was a frightened young girl, dressed in the tattered clothes of a barmaid. Ranma stopped chanting as the scene began to play out. "What is this, Ranma?" The martial arts mage nodded as he explained. "People and some objects tend to leave spiritual impressions to their surroundings. They're sort of like permanent records of past events. Usually, they're too faint to detect by regular hearing devices, but my spell scroll amplifies those leftover energies and makes them visible. Shin is using his powers to fine-tune the images. In a way, it's like a magical VCR and I'm just pressing the playback button." "What's a VCR?" "Never mind. In short, I'm just opening up a window to the recent past. Let's see just how good Mr. Conrad really is." The 2 magic users watched as the scene displayed the pompous Conrad facing off against his 5 attackers. They all pulled out swords and were about to converge on him, but Melissa's sweeter laughed as he held out his sword and said, "It's time we danced together." In a flash, Conrad's sword weaved in and out with masterful strokes as he dispatched his enemies in a blur. In less than 2 heartbeats, his opponents were sprawled on the ground with only the Ranma knight standing victorious. Then the scene faded away into nothingness. Ranma nodded as he had gotten all the information he needed. "I thought so. That Conrad is nothing but a big faker. As much as I hate to admit it, at least Kuma worked for his skills." "So you saw it too?" Gila asked. "Yep. And I've come across something like it before in my travels, so I know how to deal with it. It's got a couple of fatal flaws and I doubt that moron even knows about them. Are you sure you don't want me to?" "Mumber, it's okay. You don't have to waste your time looking for it. I can handle it." "Are you sure? I mean, it's not something to take lightly. It can really hurt you." "Exactly how good are your sword skills?" "Well, that, yes, is a secret exclamation point double quote left parenthesis 3. Ranma had always loved the Slayers online, especially that Zello's character. "I really hated when you do that," Gila pouted. "Sorry, I couldn't resist. In any case, tell no one of what we've learned tonight. Especially Melissa or her friends. What are you planning?" Ranma took on a wicked smirk. "I think it's high time for Ms. Know-Nothing Know-It-All to sweat it out a bit." 5 days before the duel, Melissa was wringing her hands as she watched Ranma laze about in the branches of a nearby tree. Why wasn't he training for the duel? Didn't he hear about Conrad's great sword skills? He had taken out 5 armed men in an instant. Everyone in Alphen was talking about that event. If Ranma didn't start practicing and soon, then he'll lose his life, and she would be condemned to a life with Conrad. The priestess became very sick at the thought, and though she didn't want to admit it, she was getting a bit worried for Ranma's safety. He was crude, poorish and had no manners to speak of, but even he didn't deserve to die because of her pride. Ranma appeared to be blissfully unaware of the girl's frustration and concern for him, as he casually munched on an apple. 4 days before the duel, the Miley priestess was getting more agitated as Ranma lay peacefully on a hillside and watched the clouds above him. Every now and then he'd point up to one of the puffy shapes and address his cat. "Listen, that one looks like a big fish, doesn't it? Meow." Ranma, the magic-using martial artist, casually looked up at the very perplexed priestess. "Yeah? Just what are you doing? What's it look like?" "I'm relaxing," Ranma replied casually. "Relaxing? At a time like this? Why not? It's such a beautiful day. You really ought to lighten up and enjoy it." Melissa became exasperated at Ranma's lack of concern. "How can you be so calm about this? Do you realize what's at stake? Remind me again as to what I'm fighting for this Saturday." "It's not like it's anything really important." "Not important? We're talking about my future. If Conrad wins, then I'll have to marry him." "How can that not be important?" The favorite pupil of Karwa shrugged. "Hey, it's not like I'm the one making that trip down the aisle. And when you think about it, if Conrad wins, then we both win." "What are you talking about?" "Well, if he wins, then you leave the Order of Miley, right? That means that you won't have to follow the decree of the War God. Therefore, I won't be your chosen hero anymore and you'll never see me again." We both didn't want this hero business, so this could be the easiest way out of that nonsense. Everybody wins if I throw the fight. But I'll be stuck married to Conrad. Okay, so Conrad and I win. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. But considering how you and your Incuton boyfriends have treated me so far, I'm very tempted to throw the fight and let Conrad take you back to Ranma. This made Melissa begin to panic. You wouldn't." "Well, I didn't say that I would. Yet." Ranma gathered up his rune cat and left Melissa to think about a few things. Just before he was out of sight, he called back to her. "Remember, Ms. Know-Nothing Know-It-All. You could have avoided this mess if you had simply said no to Conrad, instead of pulling this chivalry crap." As he headed back to the Magic Academy, he nodded to his cat, as his thoughts and the felines mingled due to their psychic link. "Meow. Well, of course I'm not going to throw the duel. I just wanted Melissa to think about how she should be more appreciative when someone does her a big favor, especially when she had no right to drag me into her problems. If she had just asked me, then I might have considered it." Mew. "Yeah, well, it's the story of my life. Nobody ever bothers to give me that simple courtesy." Meow. "Why have I decided not to throw the fight? For 3 reasons. Number 1, I do know how Melissa feels, probably a lot more than what she has with Conrad. Number 2, losing to a wimp like him, even on purpose, would leave a really bad taste in my mouth. I happen to like winning. And number 3, The last time I tried to throw a fight, it almost got me killed. Meow. Oh, it was some dope who couldn't see a mountain at 10 paces. My uncute fiancé had this bright idea of losing to him so I could get rid of another fiancé. Talk about lame. 3 days before the duel, Melissa couldn't believe what she was seeing as she watched from behind some trees. At first she had thought that Ranma was getting serious about the duel and was in training, but what she beheld made her hopes plummet. Ranma couldn't fight with a sword. He was in a clearing in the forest and was swinging with a wooden practice sword at a training post. However, he was moving with all the skill and grace of a drunken ape and was hitting with very weak strikes. Even a novice swordsman could beat him. Conrad was going to slice him to ribbons on Saturday. The priestess shook her head as images of Ranma's bloody body entered her mind. She couldn't be worried about his well-being, could she? She shook her head again and convinced herself that she was merely concerned with his safety, as a loyal Miley priestess would be to her chosen hero. It was strictly her duty, that was all. With that in mind, she went off to find Jeannie. It would take some doing, but she was certain that the paladin could give Ranma the lessons he needed to win, or at least to survive. As Melissa quietly left, Ranma smiled and stopped randomly hitting the training post. He had long since sensed her presence, thanks to his enhanced awareness. When he was certain that she was gone, he then got down to serious business. Focusing his ki into the wooden blade, he swung it in a quick and nearly invisible arc at his target. A moment later, 3 crisscrossing lines appeared on the post, causing it to fall apart in neatly sliced sections. He smiled down at his handiwork. Through the years, he had been working on improving his sword techniques. He had long since exceeded Kuno's kendo skills, and with the extra training from Jenny and the other blade masters he had met during his adventuring trips, he was quite the accomplished swordsman. Though he still preferred to fight unarmed, he did see the advantages of extended reach, and there were some things that one didn't want to touch with one's hands. Maybe I'll get the chance to use that new technique I made up last month. 2 days before the duel. I really don't think this training is necessary, Ranma remarked as he and Jeannie faced each other with wooden practice swords. Currently, he was standing casually with his weapon slung across the back of his neck. The red-haired warrior woman growled a bit as she took a ready stance. That's not what I hear. And from what I see so far, I'm going to have my work cut out for me. She assessed his stance and assumed that Ranma didn't know the first thing about proper swordsmanship. And just so you know, I'm only doing this as a favor to Melissa. Really? I didn't think she was that desperate. The magician and martial artist remarked. What that's supposed to mean. Having an uncute tomboy like you for a tutor is pretty pathetic, considering that you happen to be uncoordinated, have gaping holes in your defense and have all the tact of a raging bull. You ain't got nothing to teach me. Why you? In an instant Jeannie charged at him. Ranma always knew which buttons to push to get her going with a full head of steam. And of course, Once she starts, Ranma always finished it. He deftly ducked under Jeannie's swing, then used a leg sweep to knock her off her feet. Jeannie landed hard on her rear and back, as her opponent easily disarmed her with a simple wrap to her wrist, causing her hand to reflexively open. Before she could recover, Ranma planted the tip of his sword at her throat. "I win. You bastard. You cheated." "Really? And how did I cheat?" "You are supposed to use your sword in a duel. You just used those stupid unarmed moves again." "Oh? And if they were so stupid, then how come you're on your back? Besides, I don't remember anyone saying that you can't use your legs in battle. That's not how it's done." She angrily brushed aside his sword and got up. "A duel is supposed to be between two people and their sword skills. Using your legs is wrong." "Really? I didn't think there was a handbook on proper dueling. Maybe I should borrow your book on the subject." He then gave her another of his irritating smirks. "Arg. I don't know why I even bothered, if you're not going to follow the rules." With those words, the short-tempered female stomped away. When she was long gone, Ranma looked down at his rune cat, who happened to be sitting nearby and had seen the entire affair. "Meow. Well, sure. I know the proper etiquette to sword dueling. I did learn from Aunt Jenny and those other masters. I just don't think following those rules will do any good, and as I recall, Conrad didn't state any rules to our duel, so I'm free to use whatever techniques I want. After all, he's going to cheat anyway, right?" "Roar!" Shin answered in complete agreement. The night before the duel, at the temple of Miley, Melissa was at her wit's end. She was kneeling before the altar and praying desperately for Miley to send her a miracle. Ranma had done nothing but laze about, and now it was too late. It looked like he did not even care, and his threat to throw the match had her on edge. Oh, if only she had just said no to Conrad. "It's against my will. It's against my will. It's against my will." In another part of the temple, the head priestess, Ranma, Hilo and Karwes were quietly having tea. In the master magician's lap was Shin. Like Hila, he was very interested in his pupil's familiar. He made a note to ask Ranma if he could borrow the rune cat for a few days. "So Ranma, are you ready for your match tomorrow? The entire town is talking about it," Jenny commented as she took a sip of her tea. "No problem," Ranma replied as he munched on a cookie. "You seem quite calm for someone who hasn't trained for what may end in your death," Jenny said with a bit of concern. "Who says I haven't been training? Melissa has been telling me that you haven't been taking this upcoming duel very seriously." "Oh, Ms. Know-Nothing Know-It-All told you?" "Yes, well, the thing is, we've all known you for a long time, Ranma, and you have always taken your training and challenges very seriously." Hila smiled as she answered for her friend. "Yeah, well, this time, Ranma doesn't have to train hard to beat Conrad." "You got that right." Both young magic users laughed a bit, arousing the curiosity of the priestess and the master magician. It seems that you youngsters know something that we don't. Carwes commented. Yes, would you mind letting us in on the secret? Jenny asked. Ranma and Milo looked at each other, then shrugged as they both agreed that it would not matter. After they told them, both adults became shocked. What? If that's the case, then the duel automatically goes to you, Ranma. Jenny said. Indeed. There should not even be a duel, considering that Conrad would cheat like that. Carwes agreed, and he claimed to be an honorable knight. I shall put a stop to this. Ranma held up a hand and said, and Jenny, Pops, could you keep this to yourselves? I don't want the duel to be cancelled because of a technicality. But, please, Aunt Jenny, I want to face Conrad, even if he is going to cheat with that thing. Why? Carwes asked. Because I want to teach a few people some object lessons. First, Aunt Jenny wanted me to give Melissa a couple of lessons in humility. Letting her sweat it out for a week is my way of showing her that she shouldn't pull that chivalry garbage and dump her problems on someone else, just because she didn't want to face them herself. Second, I'm going to show Conrad that he can't fake his way into someone's heart. Besides, hypocrites like him really annoy me. Third, I'm going to show a certain cute tomboy that she shouldn't scoff at lots she doesn't understand. I see. Jenny became deep in thought as she considered Ranma's request. Finally she nodded. Very well, Ranma. The duel shall proceed. However, you will be bound by the rules. Since it will be a contest of skills with the blade, you will not be allowed to use your magic, even though your opponent will be cheating. A pity. The head of the Magic Academy sighed. I would have liked to see how much you had improved since you left the academy. Hey, don't worry about it, Pops. I got it covered. The day of the duel, the stadium in which all official duels and contests took place was crowded to full capacity. The inhabitants of Opham had come to watch the great knight of Ranma take on a barely known sorcerer in a duel of honor. Many believed that it would be a one-sided fight or rather slaughter. The legend of Conrad's great skills with the blade had spread far and wide, making him the favorite to win. The fact that he was dueling to claim his beloved was a romantic notion and it had captured the imagination of many of the female spectators. In fact, 3 particular girls were anxious to see Ranma get skewered. They were the 3 apprentice priestesses that had accompanied him and Melissa during that debacle at that zombie-infested temple. They did not like the way Ranma treated their role model and were hoping that this would be his last day. When Jenny and Melissa took their places at the main podium, the crowds quieted down as they waited for the combatants to arrive. A few minutes later, the pompous knight of Ranma appeared and strutted confidently into the arena, dressed in his armor with his trusty sword at his side. There was a huge roar from the throngs of people as Conrad raked in his fame for all it was worth, waving to the crowds. He had planned to make his victory the most spectacular sight ever, a display most worthy of a great hero such as he. It would be most fitting after he had dispatched his opponent and claimed his beloved Melissa. In the podium, Melissa winced as she beheld the person who just might become her husband. Her anxiety became more intense as she heard her disciples cheering for Conrad. Yeah, kill that rotten sorcerer. Rip him apart. Show him what a true hero is like. Jenny noticed that her top pupil was none too pleased at this ovation over her sweeter. She nodded as she remembered back to her discussion with Ranma during that fateful ceremony which bound him to Melissa. Perhaps Melissa is beginning to understand that her idea of what a true hero should be is unrealistic. I knew from the day I first met Ranma that he was a champion. I wonder how long it will be before Melissa realizes this. Just then, the crowd's cheers became a series of boos and hissing as another person entered the arena. Dressed simply in a red, short-sleeved tunic, dark pants and leather boots, Ranma strolled toward where his opponent awaited him. Slung over his shoulder was the short broadsword that Jenny had given to him, and under his right arm was a long, fabric-wrapped bundle. He ignored the hostility coming from the majority of the people. As far as he was concerned, fame did nothing but give one a swelled head. He had learned that hard lesson in his first life. The cheers that came from the ones that counted were all that mattered to him. You go, Ranma. Meow. Hilo and Shin were sitting near the podium where Jenny and Melissa were. Sitting behind them were Jeannie and Meryl. The young thief was counting on her abacus. She had set up some betting pools on the fight and stood to make a very tidy profit. The head priestess waved to her favorite pupil, then signaled for the crowds to become quiet. At the same time, Master Carwes came into the arena and approached the two combatants. In his hands was a satin pillow with two decorative bracelets on it. Ranma recognized the bands as magic restrictors. Unlike the magic reduction manacle he had worn at the academy, these would not permit the wearer to cast any spell, either through incantations, or channeling his power through a medium. Any attempt to do so would result in a very painful shock to the wearer. They could only be opened with a special key. Carwes nodded to the both of them, then began to address the crowds. This will be a duel of honor, which will pit the physical skills of these two in swordsmanship, strength, and endurance. Since both are knowledgeable in the ways of magic, each will be required to wear a magic restrictor to ensure a fair fight. Refusal to wear the restrictor will mean an automatic forfeit. Ranma, do you accept the restrictor? Melissa felt her heart stop as her chosen hero did not answer right away. That could only mean one thing. No. He isn't thinking of forfeiting, is he? Ranma's earlier words came back to her, and he would have good enough reason to give up right here and now. She and her friends had not treated him with the least amount of courtesy. In the arena, Ranma looked out of the corner of one eye at the podium and saw the apprehension on Melissa's face. Finally, he held out his right arm. I accept. His mentor nodded as he snapped the bracelet on Ranma's forearm, then turned to Conrad. Sir Conrad, do you accept the restrictor? The pompous jerk let off a laugh as he proudly held out his right arm. But of course, I have long since given up the ways of magic, and will fight with all the gallantry and skill of Melissa's true champion. Ranma's eyebrows furrowed a bit as he watched Carwest place the bracelet on Conrad's forearm. Oh sure, you would accept the restrictor, since you won't need to cast your own spells. Not while you have that secret weapon of yours. Well, we'll see who's the champion, and who's the chump. For the to step back a few yards and wait for the referee. Carwest then stepped back and gave the signal for the fighters to begin. Conrad made a grand show of drawing his sword and pointed it at Ranma. Now then, let us begin our dance. Ranma frowned as he noted that the gem that was set in the hilt of Conrad's sword glowed slightly. He then held out the bundle in his arms and unwrapped it, revealing two wooden bookends. Taking one in his right hand, he gave it a twirl, then tossed the other weapon at Conrad's feet. The wooden blade landed in front of his opponent. What is this? He asked in complete puzzlement. Your weapon. Ranma replied simply as he took a stance. What's he doing? Meryl wondered. Why hasn't he drawn his sword? Jeannie shook her head. Southeast didn't know what he was planning, but she became very intrigued at the strange stance he had taken. She didn't recognize the style, but she had an ominous feeling about it. I didn't come here to play with sticks. I came to duel. Conrad said with indignation. Draw your weapon and quit stalling. I've already drawn my weapon. Ranma stated. You have yet to pick up yours. What? Are you a coward? Can you not fight me with a man's weapon? The son of Jean smirked. HMPF. A sword does not make anyone a man. It is the man that makes the sword, and you most definitely do not qualify as a man. As far as I am concerned, you have to earn the right to face the blade that Jenny gave to me. Rubbish. Nonsense. I will not stand for these insults. Fine then. You can fight me with that piece of junk, if you even know how. At last quip got to Conrad as he charged him with impossible speed. Kai Ranma. Rip. Melissa gasped as she saw the front of Ranma's shirt ripped open. She hadn't been able to see the sword thrust. Conrad had executed the maneuver flawlessly and she began to wonder how he had become so skilled. It had to have been by sheer luck that Ranma had twisted at the last second to avoid getting cut. No one was that fast, right? Conrad chuckled as he backed off a bit and taunted his adversary. Now do you see the folly of facing me without a real man's weapon? Ranma glanced down at the gash in his shirt and shrugged. The sword had not cut into his skin, so the damage was of no consequence. He had gauged the speed in which his foe moved, so now he was ready to give this snobbish jerk a lesson he would not forget. Enjoy your little victory, Conrad. It's the only freebie you're going to get. Tagati. Conrad then began delivering strokes, slashes and thrusts at an incredible rate. The grace and power behind the attacks would have cut down even a master swordsman. To those who were watching, Conrad was like an unstoppable force of nature and his blade flashed like lightning. However, as fast as Conrad was, Ranma was faster. The martial artist made no counter moves as he weaved in and out of Conrad's attacks, taking note of each movement. His bookend remained at his side in a relaxed position and seemed to serve no purpose other than to occupy his right hand. As he continued to dodge as if he was facing the blue blunder again, he began to recognize the sword style Conrad was using. Heavy power slashes, emphasis on delivering killing blows. Very weak defensive moves. Yep, that's Northern Ranma capital alright. Why isn't he fighting back? He'll be slaughtered. Meryl cried out. Though she was a little concerned for his safety, she was more concerned over the loss of profits she would suffer, should he lose this duel. Jeannie said nothing as she continued to watch with some interest. She had no idea that Conrad was so skilled, but even more impressive was Ranma being able to dodge his attacks. In all of their past encounters, she had never taken the time to consider his speed and agility. She had always been too angry. However, now she could see him in action and she started to develop a grudging respect for his abilities. But just a little. Sheila nodded as she saw her childhood friend continue to bait his opponent. She knew from experience that Ranma tended to test out his opponent and gauge his abilities before kicking the snot out of him. And judging from Ranma's slight smile, she assumed that he had figured out all of Conrad's tricks and was about to. Damn you. Hold still. Whoosh. Conrad's swing would have cut Ranma in half, but the martial artist simply jumped over it, then landed lightly on the flat of the blade, near the point. To everyone's amazement, he balanced easily and seemed to have become weightless as his opponent looked up in disbelief. Then Ranma attacked. WHAP. Conrad staggered backward after his foe had delivered a quick strike between the eyes, then jumped off the sword. The Ranma knight glared at his opponent with rage. How dare you march my perfect face? Ranma twirled his bookend while casually responding. If this had been steel instead of wood, then you wouldn't have a face to complain about. Hey! He cheated with magic. One of Melissa's admirers shouted out. However, Sheila shook her head. No. If that had been magic, then the restrictor would have shocked him. Then how did he do that? Meryl wondered. As you would say it, that is a secret. I shall not stand for this mockery any longer, Conrad declared. Then why don't you lie down? Ranma suggested as his foe charged in again. WHAP. Ducking another slash, he slammed his bookend into the backs of Conrad's knees, causing them to buckle. The knight fell forward and received a face full of dirt. He quickly got back up again and tried to skewer his opponent, but Ranma easily parried the sword with the flat of his wooden weapon, and locked it to one side. He then reached out with his free hand and using his middle finger and thumb, he flicked at the so-called true hero's nose, angering him even more. You're really pathetic, Conrad. You don't have a clue as to what you're doing. and I think it's time I expose you for the phony that you are. What do you mean by that? He demanded as he tried to free his sword, but Ranma's book and kept it down and away. If you truly were trained in the style of Northern Ranma capital, then you would know of its weaknesses, such as a tendency to swing in wide arcs, and very poor recovery time. Very easy to evade, and to take advantage of. Of course, since you let your sword do all the work, you wouldn't know any of that. What are you talking about? Conrad raged as he finally broke away and was about to attack again. Oh yeah, and it's also very weak against stabbing motions. Like this. To everyone's astonishment, Ranma then gave them a demonstration of Kuno's best technique. He let loose with a series of staccato thrusts that were nearly too fast to perceive. Conrad found himself being forced backward under the onslaught. His sword couldn't deflect all of the blows and several ripped into his armor as if it were made of tinfoil. Behind him, the arena wall began to crumble. Jiwa let off a low whistle as she saw the effects of Ranma's attack. Wow, just from the air pressure alone. 6. By this time, Genie was speechless. Conrad was now towering against the ruined wall as Ranma pointed out the final flaw of the sword style he was using. With a simple block, then a special twist, he forced Conrad's sword out of his hands and sent it flying upward. Novices of this style tend to grip the sword too hard, thereby making it easier for them to be disarmed. At that moment, Ranma heard a voice. "Ranma, look out!" He twisted about to block Conrad's blade as it came down by itself, then began to swing and thrust on its own. However, he easily countered every move and continued to speak. "Like I said, Conrad, you wouldn't know any of these weaknesses, since you let your magic dancing sword do all the work." Conrad leaped at that point. The jig was up. So that's it. A magic sword. No wonder he was so good. Genie stated. Jiwa nodded with pride as she watched Ranma take control of the duel. Now that Conrad was stripped of his only edge, he was no longer a threat. Ranma smirked as he anticipated each of the sword's movements. As its name implied, a dancing sword moved in a specific pattern and rhythm. It was like a dance and did not change. Since this particular sword was created in Ranma, it was imbued with all the moves of that sword style. There was no variation and it was easy for him to dodge and counter each attack. A few moments later, he caught the sword in a bind and sent it flying toward the arena wall. The blade impacted hard and buried itself into the stone. Then he delivered the final blow. With a single swipe of his key-enhanced blade, he shattered the gem in the hilt, dispelling the magic that empowered the weapon. The sword fell to the ground as a lifeless length of steel. Conrad cried out in despair. "No! My father's dancing sword!" Ranma snorted in disgust as he faced off against the phony. "Too bad." He then walked over to where the second bookend lay and kicked it toward Conrad's feet. "Now, as I said before, it's time for you to pick up your weapon." Conrad at this point had no desire to face his foe. His one advantage was gone and there was only one other option he could try. Wait. We're both magicians, right? Why don't we make this into a duel of magic? I thought you said you gave up magic, Conrad. I really hate it when people don't follow the rules they set up for themselves. Please wait. Besides, we can't use magic with these restrictors on, remember? The only reason that dancing sword worked was because it had its own power gem. It didn't need any help from its wielder, other than the secret password to activate it. So now, as you said before, let's dance. No. Without that sword, I'm just a good-looking guy with long legs and, with or without that sword, you're nothing, Conrad. You see you're this great warrior. You don't know the first thing about being a warrior, so I'm going to give you a taste of what a real warrior can do. At that point, Ranma took a different stance and held out his book before him. Conrad, fearing for his life, picked up the other book and looked about for a way out. Ranma smirked as his foe was frozen with fear. Then he decided to use one of his newer techniques. He had been working on this particular movement for a long time. Unknowingly, he had rediscovered one of Ranma's forbidden techniques. He then remembered an anime he had seen called Samurai Deeper Kill and decided to use it, just as he did with the dragon slave. Holding up his free hand, he made a bit of his ki appear on his index and middle fingers. He then began running the tips of his fingers across the blade of the wooden sword, causing it to glow with light. He's cheating with magic this time. Another of Melissa's admirers declared. Oh, and Conrad's dancing sword was fair then. Gillip won't doubt. Besides, the restrictor Ranma's wearing is still active, so that can't be magic. Then what is it? Genie wondered. Ranma smirked as his fingers reached the tip of the book and he began to softly speak the first line. Meanwhile Jinpu style. Satsujin Ken Conrad was now petrified and couldn't move as Ranma raised his sword above his head, then brought the sword down in a graceful arc. A huge wind had been swept up and blew toward Conrad. The false knight screamed like a little girl as he was enveloped in the gale's force. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it died down, leaving the knight seemingly unharmed. Conrad began to laugh at Ranma's failure, but then he heard an ominous cracking sound. Afterwards, his book fell apart, followed by his armor. Metal plates clattered to the ground, leaving a stunned Conrad exposed to everyone. Ranma smiled evilly after he had shelled his opponent like a lobster. You heard it too, didn't you? The voice of the wind. Wow! You are so awesome, Ranma. Gila cried out. Genie was in a state of total disbelief. It couldn't be possible. Ranma couldn't be better than her. As for Melissa's fans, they became revolted when they saw Conrad in only his boxer shorts. Their image of a handsome knight disappeared in an instant. What is that? He's so skinny. Ranma opted to finish off this prancing nobody and charged at him. Anything goes. Final attack. Conrad cried out as he closed his eyes and cringed. FWHUMP. Everyone stared in shock at what Ranma had done to his opponent. Then he started to laugh, followed by Meryl, Jeannie, and all the rest. Soon the entire stadium was rocking with mirth. Even Jenny and Melissa couldn't help but chuckle at the sight. Who wouldn't after seeing Ranma pull Conrad's boxer shorts over his head? Anything goes final attack. WADGIE. Melissa's sweeter had been humiliated and defeated. Not wanting to endure any further shame, Conrad ran for the exit with his shorts up his head and his cheeks protruding. All the respect he had gained from his false skills was gone and the crowds now cheered for his rival. The martial arts mage smiled as he waved to the crowds and gave the people in the podium a bow. As Car West declared him as the winner of the duel, Hilo and Shin came down from the stands to give their friend a victory hug. High up in the podium, Jenny applauded and glanced over to Melissa, who was in a mixed state of emotions. You may say that having Ranma as your hero is against your will, Melissa. However, even you have to admit that he is a hero. Not the kind of hero you want, but a hero nonetheless. To be continued. Author's notes. Wow, and I thought the last chapter was long. In any case, the duel between Ranma and Conrad is now over, but like Kuno, Goose and Ryoga, you can bet that Fake Knight will be back. At this Melissa and the girls will start to realize that having Ranma around isn't so bad, though it's still going to be an uphill battle. Next chapter, we'll see Meryl and Ranma interact as the girl thief comes into a lot of money after Ranma's duel. More hijinks ensue as Ranma tries to teach her the downfalls of greed. 1. Think of the most irritating and annoying voice you have ever heard in your life and imagine that person talking non-stop. That would make anyone sick to the stomach. 2. But we all get the joke, right? 3. He. 4. Famous quote Mike Tyson gave to Michael Spinks, before devastating him in the first round. 5. This was one of my favorite episodes of Samurai Jack. 6. Nebiki's quote. Asterisk Chapter 9 Asterisk, Chapter 7, Easy Come, Easy Go Rune Soldier or Anime Disclaimer, Ranma 1/2 and Rune Soldier Louie belong to their own respective creators. Greater Than, Thoughts Chapter 7 Easy Come, Easy Go. The Kingdom of Ophan, at an inn in the city of Fen. 1. Meryl smiled with a look that would have made Nebiki Tendo proud. At long last, the male member of their adventuring team had made her some considerable coin. All the trials, all the headaches, all the insults, all the pain, had been worth it. Never before had the young brunette seen so much gold. Her winnings in the betting pools during Conrad and Ranma's duel had amounted to more than 10,000 gold pieces. She had finally paid off the tax collectors and all of her debts, as well as Jeannie's and Melissa's. They were her best friends after all. As for Ranma, well, she didn't see any reason to let him have any of it, especially the hell he had put the three of them through. She sighed as she hugged the huge ceramic jar that held all of the money. Then she got an idea and stripped off all of her clothes. She then immersed herself into her winnings and lavished in the container as if she was enjoying a hot spring. It wasn't every day that she got to enjoy soaking in gold. Life couldn't get any better. However, as she continued to soak in her winnings, she couldn't help but feel somewhat edgy at having so much wealth. There were bandits, thieves and robbers all over Fen, and she would have to protect her darling jar. The Laughing Swan. Jeannie and Melissa both stared in disbelief as they watched Ranma eat. This was their first time at seeing the anything goes eating techniques in action, and it took all of their willpower not to throw up. Melissa was especially disgusted as she watched him make his food disappear. He seemed to be utterly ignorant of even the most rudimentary of table manners. A true hero is supposed to know etiquette. At the very least, he should chew before swallowing. It looked as if he were inhaling his meal. And how was he eating so fast? By using just a pair of thin, wooden sticks. He hadn't even touched the knife and fork in front of him, as he had produced those sticks out of thin air and began to wolf down his meal. The fact that he was devouring enough to feed a dozen people made her feel even more revolted. She began to feel so sick of watching him eat. She started to lose her own appetite as she looked down at her dinner and saw an empty plate. The priestess' eyes widened even further as she wondered just where her food had disappeared. She had ordered some pork cutlets and was certain that she hadn't taken a bite yet. She then looked over to her companion as Jeannie also gasped in surprise. "Hey! Where's my dinner?" the red-headed swordswoman demanded. She had ordered a prime cut of beef and a large side of potatoes. It was the first good meal she had had in a long while, now that she didn't have any taxes and debts to worry about. She had been ready to dig in, when she was distracted for a moment by Ranma eating his own meal. Ranma paused between gulps and shrugged. "Yeah, that steak was a bit overdone, and those potatoes could have used some more seasonings. And those pork cutlets really weren't worth the price listed on the menu." "What? You hate our dinners?" Jeannie cried out in outrage. It was bad enough that this jerk put them through hell during their adventures, but he had the gall to steal their food in front of them. And that steak had smelled so good too. Melissa was also angry that Ranma had eaten their meals, but she was a bit curious as to how Ranma had done it. She could have sworn that she had been watching him all the time. When and how did he manage to eat a large steak and all that other food, while still devouring his own gigantic meal? The magician and martial artist shrugged again as he continued eating and responded between bites. "Hey! Gulp! It ain't my fault. Bite! At you too. Chomp! Or too slow. Munch! Like they say. Gobble! You snooze. Nod! You lose. Crunch! I would think. Yummy! And you'd know. Slurp! How to keep lots yours. Especially you. Miss, I can't fight without a weapon. Gulp! I swear, your reflexes are like a dead slug's. Chomp! Awareness is non-existent. Gobble! And your defense sucks. crunch. It didn't take any effort to get at your food. Why you? Jeannie growled as she felt her temper rising again. You are going to pay for our dinners. Ranma polished off the remainder of the food, then nonchalantly propped his feet up on the table. Beside him, Shin yawned as he finished off his plate of fish and decided to take a cat nap. And why should I pay for something twice? Ranma asked innocently. What are you talking about? Jeannie demanded. You didn't pay for our meals. Oh yes I did. Ranma pointed out. You got the money from Meryl, after she paid off all of your debts and taxes, right? And exactly where did she get the money? She got it from all of her betting pools from my duel with Conrad. So as I see it, you two wouldn't have been able to afford any meals without me. You'd probably still be dodging the tax collector. In fact, you three owe a great deal to me, ever since we met. We owe you nothing. Jeannie denied. Oh, that's not how I see it. For one thing, if it weren't for me, Melissa would have become Mrs. Conrad of Ranworth, right? He gave the priestess a knowing grin. Melissa became extremely agitated at that fact, though she couldn't deny it. It weren't for me, then all three of you would still be in debt up to your eyebrows. I saved you girls twice, despite the fact that you ignored my advice. Now whom do you think you have to thank for getting you all out of the hole? You're kind of help we don't need. Jeannie growled. The way I see it, this group needs all the help it can get. Ranma said nonchalantly as he polished off his dinner and got up. Shin woke from his nap and leapt up to his master's right shoulder. Where are you going? Melissa asked, though she was just as perturbed as her comrade was. I'm going to collect on what Meryl owes me. I figure that half the gold she earned from those betting pools belongs to me, since I did all the work. Ha! Good luck. Jeannie scoffed. When it comes to money, Meryl can be really miserly. Ranma shrugged. I've got some experience in dealing with those kinds of people. Compared to Nebiki, Meryl's a penny ante operator. Who? Both women asked. The martial arts mage didn't bother to answer as he exited the tavern. His reluctant and irritated traveling companions soon followed him. Meryl sighed contentedly as she continued to sit inside her darling jar. She was in absolute heaven and nothing could bring her down. Then she started smelling smoke and heard someone yell out, "Fire!" That cry of alarm quickly got her attention as black wisps of smoke began to appear from the seams between the floorboards and from under the door. She let off a scream as she hurriedly put on her undergarments and leapt out of the second-story window. Though nowhere near as agile as Ranma, Meryl's experiences as a thief allowed her to drop down to a lower rooftop, then bounced off an awning, before landing on the street below. A crowd had gathered to witness the inn as it burned. Standing in a line nearby, the fire brigade was busily passing buckets of water in an attempt to quench the flames. Darn! Meryl griped as she watched the building go up in flames. She began to feel a draft and wished that she had put on her clothes. She also remembered that she had left her lock-picking tools and other equipment in her room, as well as her no, my darling jar. Paying no heed of the danger, Meryl grabbed a bucket of water from one of the fire brigade volunteers and doused her with it. She then ran headlong through the front door, much to the shock of everyone watching. Hey! Where are you going? Are you crazy? Who is this darling jar guy? A minute later, Meryl emerged through a window near the roof with a huge bundle on her back. She then made a not-so-graceful landing in a water reservoir and ran off. Don't worry, my darling jar. I'll protect you. A few minutes later, Ranma and the others arrived at the scene. After hearing the fire alarm, the group decided to check on Meryl as the fire was in the vicinity of the inn that she was staying at. Looking around, they saw no sign of their missing group member and decided to ask the locals. Hey there, did you happen to see a girl about so high around here? Ranma asked as he indicated Meryl's height with his hand. One of the fire brigade volunteers nodded as he pointed toward the burning building. Yeah. For some odd reason, she ran straight back into the inn, shouting about her darling jar. Why would she do something like that? Jeannie asked as she and Melissa became very concerned. Is she all right? Melissa questioned. Oh yeah, she's fine. The man then pointed up toward the roof of the adjacent building. She got out through there, then landed in the water tank before running off. The martial arts mage became introspective as he gauged Meryl's feet. The funny thing is, she kept on hollering about her darling jar. The man finished as he went back to helping to put out the fires. The two women and Ranma all gazed upon each other with puzzled expressions, then went off in search of their comrade. In a little shack under the bridge overlapping the river, Meryl was more than little paranoid as she clutched at her jar and was ready to skewer anyone with her throwing daggers. So far, she had dodged and stopped all real and imagined attempts to steal her darling jar from her. This included falling flower pots, alley cats, and some people, whom she was sure was following her. All of which were mere coincidences, and the fact that it was Meryl's friends who were trying to find her. She was so certain that someone was out to take her darling jar, that she would kill the next person who even so much as come within 10 feet of her. Hey Meryl. FFFFFDDDD. ACK. The female thief turned about and took a ready stance, then beheld Melissa, Jeannie and Ranma standing at the front door of her home. The martial arts magician was a bit perturbed as he had her dagger clenched between his teeth. With uncanny skill and speed, he had caught the blade a heartbeat before it found its mark. Spitting out the knife, he then glared at the girl, then noticed that she looked like hell. She was in disheveled state and it seemed as if she hadn't slept for days. Meanwhile, back on Ranma's world, Nabiki sighed as she counted her earnings from her daily blackmail and betting pools. Profits had been declining steadily since Ranma's disappearance, and it wouldn't be long before the Tendo finances would be dire straits. As for her father and his friend, Sue and John were constantly moaning and groaning about the schools never being joined. That was the least of their problems as far as the middle Tendo daughter was concerned. If Ranma soon didn't return, then more troubles were just ahead. On the upside, Nabuki didn't have to concern herself with constant repairs to the dojo or their house. No Ranma meant no fiancés and no rivals coming and causing damage. On the downside, Akane had gotten angrier. Since the old beat her so you can date her routine was now back in full swing with Kumo at the head of the horde of Ranma. The difference was that since Ranma was no longer protecting her, she had to make up for the lack of practice in her martial arts skills. She had been getting more hits and even the Wannabe Samurai had come close to defeating her. Naturally, of course, she blamed Ranma for her predicament, but it was more of a moot point, since he was not present. Luckily for her, the rest of the fiancé brigade had stopped attacking her. At first, Yukio, Shampoo and Kodakai all blamed the youngest Tendo daughter for driving Ranma away, but eventually, each had decided that fighting over someone who wasn't there was pointless, and the three had all gone off in different directions in order to find him. With that thought, Nabuki began to think about the Amazons. She had a hunch that Cologne knew more than what she was letting on. She had seen the elder poking about on the roof of the Tendo home, near the spot where Ranma usually brooded when he was upset or depressed. And the last time anyone had seen the heir to the Anything Goes, he had been in quite a mood. After investigating the scene, Nabuki had found several fragments of what looked like a broken pendant. Knowing the Amazon's penchant for magical artifacts and such, the Mayban mirror, the love pills, etc., she correctly guessed that Ranma's sudden disappearance had something to do with magic and that the warrior women were involved. Furthermore, Shampoo wasn't quite as enthusiastic as usual in finding her errand. That meant that something was up, and that the Cologne's great-granddaughter was in the know. With that in mind, Nabuki decided to investigate further on the Amazon factor. Taneko Cologne nodded as she added a few more key ingredients to the cauldron. Hanging above the bubbling brew was a fragment of the magical pendant that she had taken from the roof of the Tendo home. She hoped that the Assyrian spell would allow her to find her missing son-in-law. Standing nearby and in great anticipation was Shampoo. Tied up and gagged in a cage was Moose in his cursed form. This will find Aaron, great-grandmother. Cologne was cautiously optimistic as she replied. Perhaps. According to what Moose had told us, he lost the pendant before he could make his wish. From what I found on the Tendo's roof, this fragment should have some traces of its mystical energies. Since I sensed some of Ranma's ki intermingled with the fragments, I would surmise that the pendant had granted whatever wish he made before it shattered. This Assyrian spell should be able to track Ranma, even if he's in another dimension. I also got this from Ako's eyes. The elder then produced the Mayban mirror, which had a cracked surface with pieces of tape holding the glass together. Hiya! Shampoo thought mirror destroyed. Well, once Happy gets something important, even if it is broken, he tends to keep it. It took a bit of doing for me to confiscate it from him, but I think it is still functional. So we use mirror to bring back Aaron, when we find him. That is my hope, though we are dealing with two damaged artifacts, and I cannot predict the effects with 100% certainty. However, we had no other options. With those words, Cologne added the final ingredient and began chanting. The smoke from the cauldron enveloped the fragment and started to glow. Slowly, the mists began to take shape, forming a kind of circle in midair. Within the circle, images of the past began to appear. At first they were blurry and indistinct, but gradually became clearer. Finally, the image of Ranma was depicted as he sat on the tendo roof and brooded. "Aaron!" Champa cried out happily as she beheld her future husband. "Not quite," Cologne reminded her. "These are simply images of the past, just before the pendant was broken. Now be silent. I want to hear the wish Ranma made." A few moments later, after seeing him rant about his problems with the fiancé brigade and his rivals, they both heard Ranma's fateful words, just as the pendant appeared before him. "Man, I wish there was a way for me to start over." Those who were present were blinded by a flash of light as the magic pendant granted Ranma's wish, causing him to disappear. Then the smoke dispersed as the power within the fragment faded away. The Amazon matriarch nodded as she took in all the information and theorized what had occurred that fateful night. "Great-grandmother, what happened to Ranma?" "Well, as far as I can surmise, Ranma's wish to start over was taken seriously and literally by the pendant. I believe he was transported to some place, perhaps another dimension, so that he could start a new life, I suppose. Now I'm not certain as to the exact details of the wish, but wherever he is now, he most certainly doesn't have any of the problems in this world. But we can still bring Aaron back, yes? Well, I can find him. Bringing him back is another matter. The pendant was an ancient and very powerful artifact, and if it was able to transport Ranma into another reality, then it may be beyond my ability to retrieve him. Is no hope. I didn't say that, Shampoo. We do have the Maban mirror, and we can use it to go to him, once I find which reality he's in. However, there is a catch. There's not much magical energy left in the mirror, and in its damaged state, it may be the last time it can be used. If anyone were to use the mirror to travel to where Ranma is, then he or she would not be able to return. It will be a one-way trip. Shampoo will go to Aaron. I can see that you are determined, child. If you are willing to sacrifice all, then I will help you in this. In order to satisfy our 3,000 years of Amazon history, we must prepare the proper rituals in order to activate the mirror. Champa thought only need to cry to make mirror work. Not in this case. The mirror is broken and we'll need a boost in order to get it working. I know of a few spells which can help, but we must act quickly. The purple-haired Amazon nodded as she and her relative left to prepare. In his cage, Mewtwo struggled to free himself. He had to stop them from finding Ranma. If shampoo were to go to him now, then the myopic hidden weapons master would lose her forever. Nabiki became intrigued after she had found Akko's eye in a battered and beaten state. After learning that it had been Cologne who had attacked him and took the broken Mayban mirror, she began to wonder what the Elder's plans were. She also began to consider the profits to be made from selling such information. Back to Ranma. I don't why I let you talk me into this. Ranma grumbled as he continued to dig the hole. He couldn't use the breaking point, since the ground was mostly composed of loose dirt, mud and very little sedimentary rock. The Amazon technique would have simply caused the debris to scatter, instead of create the crater that he'd have wanted. He could have used an earth spell, but had decided to save power. The labor was nothing compared to his daily martial arts training regimens anyway. Sitting near the hole and offering moral support in the form of meows, was Shin. Sitting nearby, still clutching at her darling jar, was Meryl as she kept watch. Behind her were Jeannie and Melissa. The swordswoman smiled as she watched the source of all her troubles toil away. It was about time that Ranma did some heavy work. Though she couldn't help but wonder how he managed to lug that impossibly heavy backpack around so easily all the time. Heck, he wasn't even sweating yet. As for Melissa, she was curious as to why her chosen hero had not decided to take the easy way and use his magic. Why was he taking the long way and using those well-developed biceps, pectorals and back muscles too? The priestess shook her head and banished such thoughts from her mind. Ranma was more trouble than he was worth and she should not think of him as such. So what if he had very defined abdominal muscles, flat stomach, and well-toned limbs? So what if he was fair to look upon without his shirt and flexing those muscles? That didn't mean that she should get all hot and bothered, right? That didn't mean anything at all. Gee, it was getting warm all of a sudden. A few minutes later, Ranma set aside the shovel and looked over his handiwork. He nodded and jumped out of the 15-foot deep hole and faced Meryl. Okay, Ms. Moneybags. I dug your stupid hole. So let's get this over with. He reached out to take the jar, but Meryl suddenly hissed at him like an angry cat. Her grip on the container tightened and threatened to crush the ceramic. Ranma sighed as he saw the obvious look of greed in her eyes. He had seen it often enough with Nebiki, whenever she exploited him. He then addressed the thief in a tired tone. Meryl, I can't bury your darling jar unless I can touch it. Meryl loosened up somewhat at his simple logic then, after a long moment of silence, she nodded ever so reluctantly. Meryl, if you are not out of that hole in 5 seconds, then I'm going to bury you along with that stupid jar. Shut up. Meryl cried back as she went back to saying her farewells to her precious. Don't worry, my darling jar. I'll back for you, I promise. Up above, Ranma pinched the bridge of his nose and shook his head. And he thought Nebiki was money hungry. After coaxing the youngest member of their group out of the jar's resting place, Ranma quickly filled in the hole. He then turned to the thief as he brought out a certain item from his backpack. The object looked like a cone-shaped piece of bone. "Now Meryl, this is your last chance. Are you sure you want me to do this? Money can be put better use than burying it in the ground." "Like what?" Meryl scoffed. "Well, for spending of course. That's what money's for. You can buy good food, clothes, or better yet, supplies for more adventures. If I did that, then I wouldn't have any money left. Hey, it'll be much better above ground than below it. What's the point of digging up gold and making it into coins for spending, only to put it back into the earth? Obviously, you haven't heard of the concept of saving. So you're not going to spend it at all?" "No. I'm going to save it." "Okay, so you're going to save it for later, right?" "No. I'm going to save it. I'm never going to spend it." "Huh?" Melissa took this opportunity to give him one of her moral lessons. "I agree with Meryl. Like they say, a gold coin saved is a gold coin earned. A true hero should know the value of saving one's money." Ranma became very irritated at the priestess' attempt to nag him. "Oh, shut up, Ms. Know-Nothing Know-It-All. I wasn't asking you. Besides, saving one's money to spend later is one thing, but burying it in a hole, never to spend it, makes about as much sense as buying a huge meal, but never taking one bite of it. That gold's not going to collect any interest in that hole. It would be the same as burying a rock. And now she wants me to create a guard for something that she'll never use. Just shut up and do it," Meryl demanded as she took on a very irritated expression. "You said you'd help, so make with magic." "Well, I really think you promised to do this for Meryl, so keep your word," Melissa said. "Unless you are all talk and no action," Jeannie taunted. Ranma sighed as he saw Jeannie and Melissa seemingly take sides with Meryl and nodded. Typical. No matter how stupid the idea is, girls always seem to stick together against the man! Greater than. "Oh, all right. But just remember what I told you before. This kind of magic ain't exactly my specialty." Taking the magical item in hand, he stuck its point into the ground and took a few steps back. Taking out his wand, he began chanting, "Jinmanjikudukeru. Jinmanjikudukeru. Jinmanjikudukeru." Green wisps of light appeared around the item, causing it to glow with an eerie light. The surrounding dirt and mud began to move about the item, enveloping it in a small mound. The mound began to enlarge itself as more materials were drawn into its mass. Then it began to take shape. The three women looked in awe as Ranma worked his magic. They rarely got to see him use his sorcery, and they began to reconsider his position as their group's magic user. After all, he did know of a spell that could kill a dragon. Perhaps it wasn't so bad to have such a powerful sorcerer. However, when the spell was finished and the end result stood before them, they all developed huge sweat drops as they gazed upon it. Ranma sighed again as he put down his wand and shook his head. I told you this kind of magic wasn't my cup of tea. Ranma's original world. Bear in mind, shampoo. Cologne warned as she prepared the spell. This is something that no one in our entire tribe has ever attempted. Shampoo no care. Shampoo will find Ranma. Very well then, child. Oh, I cannot, in good conscience, let you go by yourself. Therefore, I shall accompany you. Now then, in order to find Ranma, we shall use this fragment of the pendant to trace his spiritual essence. Once we have located him, we shall use the Maban mirror to transport us to him. However, in order for the spell to take full effect, we shall have to wait until the full moon tonight. Shampoo cannot wait until she is with Aaron. As the two Amazons prepared to reunite with the missing heir to the Anything Goes, they did not know that a certain someone had finally gotten free of his cage. Mithus took off for the sky in his duck form, heading toward the only place he could think of to thwart their plans, the Tendo Dojo. Back to Ranma. This is supposed to be my darling Jar's guardian, Meryl exclaimed. You've got to be kidding, Jeannie said incredulously. It's hideous, Melissa declared. Hey, I told you that this kind of magic wasn't my specialty. Ranma reminded them as he stood before the magically constructed figure. I'm not at my best when it comes to making golems. I hate to admit it, but that jerk Kyle was better than me when it came to bringing motion to the motionless. But this thing is, Meryl couldn't describe the horror she was witnessing now. Ranma's golem resembled the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. It was yellow, and was chubby, with thick limbs. It had a dopey expression on its face and did not appear to be as dangerous as Meryl had hoped. Is this best that you can do? Ranma sighed as he replied, while stepping aside. Hey, I did the best I could do with what I had. Now if we were in a quarry, then the golem would have had solid rock to form its body. But since this forest ground is mostly made of loose soil, mud and some clay and maybe some dead branches, so this is what you get. And this was your idea, Meryl, so take it or leave it. The youngest member of their group let off a sigh of resignation and nodded sadly. Okay, I'll take him. So what do I do first? Just give him a command. He'll follow it to the letter. That's what golems do. Meryl nodded as she stepped up to the walking blob and said firmly while pointing to the spot where her jar was buried. Don't let anyone touch my darling jar, you got that? For a long moment, the golem did not give any indication of understanding her order, or even heard it. The three women looked at Ranma with disapproving glares, thinking that he had created a dud. You really are useless, Meryl stated with disgust. You can't even make a golem that can follow orders. Ranma said nothing as he pointed to the golem. Really? The golem then let off a monstrous roar as it turned to face the spot where Meryl's jar was buried. Then, to everyone's surprise, the magic-made figure reached down with one massive arm, and extracted the jar from its burial spot, 15 feet below. Meryl cried out in shock as the golem then began to walk off with it. Hey! What are you doing? That's my darling jar. Put it back. Melissa and Jeannie then turned to Ranma with puzzled looks. Why did it do that? The priestess asked. And why won't it listen to Meryl? Jeannie added. Ranma shrugged. Well, it's kind of obvious. I would think that even you two could have figured it out. What do you mean? What's going on? Jeannie demanded. Ranma smiled slightly as he responded. Don't you remember what I told you about golems? They'll follow orders to the letter. When Meryl ordered it to not let anyone touch her jar, the golem took it literally. Not letting anyone touch the jar means not even letting the owner touch it. This was another reason why I didn't like this plan. Golems can be really dangerous, especially when you don't make your orders specific and clear enough. So what am I going to do? At this point Meryl was very pale and was close to having a stroke as she saw her money walk away. Ranma shrugged. Well, the first option would be the best. I could try reversing the spell and reduce the golem back into its component elements. Then do it. Melissa insisted. I can't. Why not? Jeannie demanded. I don't know the counter spells to unmake golems. I can make them, but I can't undo them after they've been created. That was the third reason why I was against this plan. I told you that this kind of magic wasn't my specialty. You jerk. Why didn't you tell us all this before? Meryl cried out. The magic-using martial artist shrugged his shoulders once more. Hey, I told you three that I didn't like this plan and I tried to get you to change your minds. You three didn't bother to ask why I didn't favor this idea and you all insisted that I do it. Don't blame me for your being so pig-headed. So what now? Meryl asked. Ranma gave off yet another tired sigh. Well, I guess we're going to have to go with option number 2. We'll have to destroy it physically. I created a low-level golem with very little regenerating ability, so if it takes enough damage, then it should break apart. And we'd better do it quick, before that golem decides that the best way to keep anyone from touching the jar is to destroy it. It's been known to happen. What? Meryl shrieked as she began running after the monster. Melissa and Jeannie both gave Ranma disgusted looks, then ran after their friend. Ranma picked up Shin and began to calmly follow them. Give me back my darling jar, Meryl shouted as she threw out her daggers. However, her weapons impacted into the golem's body and were absorbed into it. Jeannie hefted her long sword and took one mighty swing at its midsection. Comically, the golem was cut in two, but the torso then landed on its lower half and became whole again. Melissa swung with her warhammer, but the instrument became stuck. She desperately pulled hard to get it out before it was sucked into the golem's body. She landed hard on her rear as she managed to free her weapon. The golem kept on marching on with Meryl's jar. Ranma shook his head. He watched his comrades' antics. Idiots. You can't use blades and hammers against a walking pile of mud. Greater than Meryl then jumped onto the golem's back to get at her jar. However, she was absorbed into its body. A second later, A huge bulge formed out of the monster's rear end and was released like a pile of Meryl emerged from the blob, all covered in mud, grime and various other things. What? You thought that mud and dirt were the only things in the ground? She then looked up and saw Ranma standing before her with a grin on his face. I bet you're feeling really poop right now. Too, this isn't funny. Meryl glared at him. And I don't see you doing anything to help. Well, if you want me to, I can stop that thing. Yeah, right. You said you didn't know how to reverse the spell. Yeah, I said I didn't know the counter spell, but I do know how to destroy golems. I had a lot of practice breaking up Kyle's golems at the academy. With those words, he ran up to where Melissa and Jeannie were. Both were sprawled on the ground and were covered in muck. After making certain that they were unhurt, he then used Shin's power to teleport himself in front of the golem. He found himself with his back to a very steep cliff. Apparently, Ranma's suspicion about the golem's intentions was correct. It had planned to keep anyone from touching the jar by throwing it off a cliff. However, Ranma raised a hand and focused his power through his wand. Flames of the Inferno, I call thee forth. A huge bout of flames exploded forth like the breath of a dragon. They enveloped the mud monster, causing its body to harden. In less than a second, the golem became stiff as it was baked like a clay pot in a kiln. When the fires died down, the golem had been reduced to a blackened, hardened figure. However, it still tried to move toward the edge of a cliff, and that's when Ranma put away his wand and held out his right index finger. He then jabbed forth. Bakusai Tenketsu. The monster had been made of soft mud and clay before, but now that it was as hard as rock, the breaking point caused it to explode into 1,000 pieces. He set up a barrier to protect Shin from the hot, flying fragments. The girls looked on in shock as Ranma effortlessly destroyed the golem with just his finger. He did it. Jeannie gasped. What kind of spell was that? Melissa wondered. Meryl let off a whoop of joy as ran toward her darling jar, which had fallen to the ground when the golem was destroyed. It was near the cliff edge, but she didn't care as she was about to embrace her precious. Meryl, don't touch it. Ranma cried out. The flames he had conjured up to cook the golem had also heated the jar, making it extremely. Why? The brunette screamed as she hugged her jar, then let go as the heated pot burned her skin. Unfortunately, the container tumbled over the edge of the cliff, causing her to leap after it. Hey no! My darling jar! Meryl! Ranma reached out and managed to grab onto Meryl's arm, and pulled her back before she plummeted to her doom. She could only watch helplessly as her jar smashed against the side of the cliff, causing its contents to spill out and scatter down toward the ground. Hey no! My gold! My jar! Hey no! She struggled to get out of Ranma's grip and go after her money, but the son of Ranma wouldn't let her. Let it go, Meryl. Let it go. No amount of gold is worth losing your life over. And a little later, at the bottom of the cliff. No. Where are they? Where are my gold coins? Meryl was frantically splashing about in the river at the bottom of the cliff, trying to find her lost fortune. Once the group had gotten to the place where they believed the gold had fallen, they had begun searching for it. However, it seemed that it was no use. Meryl, I think you'd better stop. It looks like your gold was washed away by the current. Ranma said as he used Shin's sensory powers to locate the coins. The rune cat let off a meow, telling his master of the results of his probing. Shin can't detect your gold anywhere. It could be buried in the riverbed somewhere, and I don't think we'll be able to find it again. No. 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 My gold, it has to be here. It has to be. Meryl insisted as she continued to look about in the cold waters. However, by this time, even Jeannie and Melissa had to agree with Ranma that any further search would be futile. With some effort, they managed to pull her out of the river before she caught a cold. At night at the Laughing Swan. I'm really sorry that you lost all that money, Meryl, Melissa said as the group sat at a table. However, Meryl was not in a talkative mood as she mumbled over and over about the loss of her darling jar. My darling jar. My darling jar. Ranma sighed as he couldn't help but feel pity for her. Then he decided, what the heck, and nodded to Shin. The cat meowed in confusion at his master's mental request. Yes, Shin. Go ahead. You know where it is, right? Meow. The cat's forehead symbol glowed briefly, causing the three females to turn their attention toward it. In a flash of light, something appeared on the table. The object was a small, plain-looking dish that was covered in some dust and grime. It had a few cracks on its sides. What's that? Melissa asked. Ranma smiled as he answered. Well, I couldn't help but feel a little responsible for all this, so I decided to make it up to Meryl. This is her new darling jar. Meryl came out of her funk to glare angrily at him. You think you can replace my darling jar with this piece of junk? That's pretty cheap, Jeannie said in agreement. Really, Ranma? Sometimes, you can be so insensitive, Melissa added. Ranma shrugged as he got up and picked up Shin. Well, if I were you, I wouldn't look a gift jar in the mouth. I'm pretty sure that this new jar is going to make Meryl even happier than the old one did. I'll see you tomorrow. After the warrior mage left, the three females looked upon his gift with disdain. What? Is he kidding? Jeannie snorted as she appraised the container and noted some strange patterns on its side. The dirty jar did not seem to be anything special and was made of ceramic. This thing isn't worth 10,000 gold coins. I can't believe that he would think this would make up for all the trouble he caused, Melissa said haughtily. Well, at least I can get something out of all this, Meryl said as she considered what to do with Ranma's gift. I know of a good junk dealer who will give me a fair price for it. Ranma was smiling as he met with the three girls at the temple of Miley the next morning. Hey there, Meryl. And how are you feeling today? I'll bet that new jar really made you happy, right? Meryl scowled at him and snorted. What? Are you kidding? That piece of crap wasn't worth more than 10 copper coins when I sold it to Corbin the junk dealer. The magic-using martial artist became puzzled. 10 copper coins? Is that all you got for it? Yeah, what about it? That's funny. I could have sworn that it was worth a lot more than 10 copper. Our anime. The group all turned to see Hila running toward them. In her hands was a very ornamental vase. She stopped before them and proudly held it out to them. She was very excited. Ranma, you wouldn't believe the luck my father had today. What do you mean, Hila-chan? Ranma asked, though he had a feeling that he already knew. Hila smiled as she explained. This morning, Corbin the junk dealer came to our shop with us. Can you believe it? It's an actual ritual vase from the Ardnile Kingdom. Ardnile Kingdom? Melissa said, then remembered reading about it in the ancient texts. Wasn't that the mythical kingdom of the legendary warrior King Milan, the supposed descendant of the god Miley? That's right, Hila said happily. Do you know how rare the relic from Ardnile is? When Corbin wiped off the grime and dirt from the surface of this, my father almost had a heart attack. A relic like this is priceless. Priceless. Meryl stuttered as she began to realize her mistake. Yes. My father had to pay out 15,000 gold coins for it. 15,000. Meryl was now sounding like a malfunctioning outboard motor. It was actually a steal. A relic like this is worth 5 times as much. Especially since it has ancient magical qualities. I can't wait to study it. 5 times. Magical. Well, I'll see you later, Ranma. I've got to show Master Carwes. Die! At that point, Meryl turned totally white as she watched her second fortune run off toward the academy. Then, she snapped. Come back with my darling jar. Grunny, Melissa and Ranma developed sweat drops as they watched her run off after Hila. Then the male member shook his head while shrugging. Then he started to walk off. Ranma, Melissa called after him, causing him to stop and look back. Yeah? How did you get a relic from Ardnile? He smiled as he answered with a smirk. That is a secret. Then he left to go find some breakfast. The city of Fem continued ring with the shouts of a sneak thief. Give me back my darling jar. To be continued. Author's notes. Well, that takes care of this chapter. As time goes along, Ranma will show a more sensitive side, as he did here by giving Meryl a priceless artifact. Oh, it wasn't his fault that Meryl sold it without knowing its true value. Eventually, Ranma and the girls will begin to understand each other, but I'm not going to make things easy for them, and Ranma still has a few things to teach to Melissa, Jeannie and Meryl. In the next chapter, Melissa will have to own up to her greatest rival, that Ranma is her chosen hero as the festival of Miley comes around. We're also going to see the results of the Amazons' attempt to find him. See you then. 1. Thanks to my readers for clearing up that little detail. 2. Sorry, I couldn't resist the pun. Asterisk Chapter 10 Asterisk Chapter 8. This is your hero. Rune Soldier Ranma. Disclaimer: Rune Soldier Louie, Ranma 1/2 and any other references to any other anime belong to their respective creators. Greater than Thoughts. Chapter 8. This is your hero. Jenny smiled as she looked upon the assembly of priestesses and trainees in the Temple of Miley. It was good to see all of the new faces as well as the old ones. For many, this would be their first festival of Miley, which occurred once every 5 years. As the head priestess scanned the throngs of followers to the war god, her gaze lingered on one particular face. Her most promising disciple and whom many looked up to, was not happy. Oh, Melissa was a true devotee to Miley. Jenny knew that she was not at all pleased with her last revelation by their god. She had the appearance of someone with no problems, but the head priestess knew that was just a front. After all, being given a valiant champion chosen by Miley, had supposed to have been the highlight of her career as a priestess. However, when that champion happened to be a certain martial arts mage, then things had become extremely complicated and her entire world had been turned upside down. Jenny's private chambers. You seem very troubled, Melissa, the head priestess remarked as she and her favorite disciple discussed the upcoming festivities. As the lead disciple of Miley, Melissa would be in charge of organizing the ceremonies, and act as the tour guide through the various dioramas being set up to display the history of Ofun. Normally, this would have been considered as a great honor, but as of now, she was feeling a sense of depression that would have allowed her to compete with Ryoga. Melissa let off a tired sigh as she began to confess her ongoing problems with her chosen hero. Oh, head priestess Jenny. I mean no disrespect to you and Miley, but I must again protest over the fact that Ranma is supposed to be the valiant champion that I am to serve. This is... Yes, I know. Jenny cut in as she waved a hand, then took on a more stern expression. This is against your will. Must I remind you again that the will of Miley is absolute and must be carried out? Yes, I know, but I cannot change what has happened any more than you can. But this arrangement can't be all bad. I would think that by now, you have seen the great potential within your chosen hero. After all, he did aid you in your time of need, did he not? What? Surely, you had not forgotten how he had defeated that pompous fake comrade in defending your honor. And come to think of it, he did not have to accept his challenge, considering how you coerced him into fighting. Melissa was taken aback as she remembered the sticky situation that Ranma had helped her get out of. What do you mean? Ranma told me all about how you used the principles of chivalry to involve him in a situation that was none of his business. I was very disappointed to hear how you used him to avoid confronting Conrad. You could have simply said no to his advances. But head priestess, you don't understand. Melissa protested. Conrad wouldn't stop. And besides, a true hero should follow the codes of chivalry. Why? Jenny asked simply. Because that's what makes a true hero. He's supposed to be honest, courteous, well-mannered and brave. Well, Ranma is brave. Even you must admit to that. And he does tend to tell things as they are, so that would make him honest, does it not? But he's nothing as to what a true hero is. He's boorish, rude, ill-mannered, never stops insulting me and my friends, is more trouble than he's worth, and doesn't know the first thing about chivalry. Exactly. Huh? Jenny took a deep breath and collected her thoughts for a moment before replying to her puzzled pupil. Melissa, before you begin making snap judgments about your valiant champion, you should take the time to know him better. So far, all I've seen you do is mope and complain about how Ranma isn't like the characters in those storybooks that you love so much. Have you ever wondered why he's not like those people you've read about? You should not judge someone according to some outdated rules on manners and etiquette. The Laughing Swan. Another round, please. Ranma called out as he finished off his plate of food within an instant. Sitting beside him was Eva, and on the table was his rune cat Shin. While others looked on in disbelief on how much the warrior mage was packing it away, his companions were long used to seeing him eat. So Ranma, are you going to the festival of Miley tomorrow? The bespectacled girl asked, hoping that her childhood friend would invite her to tour the sights. Well, I don't know if I wanna go this time around. It was pretty boring the last time. Ranma replied as he finished off his 10th helping. He had amassed a considerable fortune, due to all of his treasure hunting adventures from the last 4 years, which was the main reason why most adventurers were having problems finding any treasure near Ulfon. Therefore, he had no troubles with paying for his meals. Of course, he didn't let on to his traveling companions that he was well off. Where would the fun be in that? Oh come on, Ranma, Eva pleaded. It'll be different this time. I hear that they've got some new displays and I believe Melissa will be hosting them. Oh, Miss Know-Nothing Know-It-All is going to run the show. Now I'm really not sure I should be going. I don't want her to keep nagging me about all that true hero junk. Now don't get me wrong, she ain't all bad. And neither are those two uncute tomboys. They aren't. Eva became concerned at this. She had been hoping to become the center of Ranma's affection and she had not been expecting any competition, especially from the Miley priestess. Judging by the way Ranma always insulted her and those other two women, she hadn't worried that any other girl could get as close to him as she was. After all, she and Ranma had grown up together. Ranma shrugged as he began digging in on his 11th helping. Hey, come on Ila-chan. You know me better than that. I don't throw out insults out of spite, just 'cause some people don't agree with me. Unless they really tick me off. Those 3 girls do have some good things about them. It's just that their bad qualities stand out a lot more. For one thing, Melissa's got to get rid of those stupid notions of chivalry. You don't believe in honor and fighting fair? Oh, I believe in honor. He amended. The only thing is, I don't believe in letting it restrict me. And as for fighting fair, well, I've learned a long time ago that the world ain't always fair. You just got to take what life throws at you and work with it. It does no good to whine about how unfair something is, 'cause it ain't gonna change unless you do something about it. Like the old saying goes, the gods only help those who help themselves. Unfortunately, Melissa seems content to just wait for Miley to solve her problems. I can see that chivalry is dead with you, Ranma, Gila said teasingly. She had gotten used to his somewhat crude manner, but had to admire his strong will and determination. Heck, I don't even see why anybody would want to follow those rules, since they do nothing but limit a person, especially when it comes to women. I mean, a guy works hard to become strong and independent, then he just leaves himself wide open to some girl. That just gives her an excuse to hurt him, and he is supposed to just stand there and take it. Seeing Gila's hurt expression, he quickly apologized. No offense to you, Gila-chan, but the main reason why I don't care for chivalry is because I used to follow something like it and it caused me nothing but trouble. Really? Yeah. It's a long story, but I used to follow a code never to hit girls, and that gave a certain uncute tomboy I knew an excuse to abuse me. Normally, she wouldn't have laid a hand on me, but I had no choice but to let her hit me. Usually it was with enough force to crush skulls. That's terrible. Yeah. Well, back then, it was looked down upon to strike a girl, even when she deserved it. And chivalry was also a weapon that was used against me. I really hated it whenever I spoke out against her, and then these morons would use these rules of honor and stuff, making me look like the bad guy. Things like honor and stuff like that were used to their advantage, then ignored when it worked against them. Now I'm finding the same thing with Melissa and the others. What do you mean? Well, let me give you an example. Jeannie swings at me with her sword and all I do is defend myself by knocking her to the ground. Melissa chides me on hitting her, and then lectures me on the rules of proper conduct. So what does that mean? I should have let Jeannie kill me, just because chivalry won't allow me to fight back against a woman? Of course not. That would be stupid. Bingo. To me, chivalry is nothing but a bunch of hypocrisy. It's just for idiots, like that moron Conrad, and I sure as heck ain't gonna end up like him. Or like a certain blue blunder I used to, no doubt greater than evil, then took on a thoughtful expression as she considered Ranma's words. Then she got a flash of insight. So, is that why you've been giving Melissa and her friends such a hard time? Because you want to teach them not to judge people according to those rules? You've always been pretty sharp, Gila-chan. Ranma admitted. Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Those three lack potential, but compared to me, They don't know much about the world or how hard it can be. Melissa has to dump those fairy tale ideas and get with reality. Jeannie needs to control that temper of hers and learn that she can't always win with a sword. And Meryl better curb that greed of hers. But most of all, they all suffer from the same habit of jump to conclusions and don't bother to wait for explanations. It looks like they'd prefer to learn things the hard way, so I guess it's going to be rough for a while. I hope they wise up soon, considering all the training I've put them through so far. You've been training them? Yup. What? Did you really think I'd let people tag along with me on my adventures, without making sure they could keep up? Come on, you know just how much trouble I get into, even when I try to avoid it. That's a fact. You agreed. You seem to be a magnet for trouble. Shin me out in agreement, as his master continued. Right. Besides, Aunt Jenny asked me to show Melissa the real world. I only know of one way to do it, so I guess she and her friends will have to take their lumps as I dish them out. I'm doing them a favor. That seems to be a little harsh, even for you, Ranma. Especially after all you've put them through so far. Considering what I went through in my past, this was small potatoes. And just remember that every time stuff happened, all they had to do was listen when I had something important to tell them. Considering that they keep on ignoring my advice, then I guess they're going to have to learn things the hard way. I'm not saying that Melissa and her friends didn't deserve all of that punishment, but I think you could go a little easier on them. Maybe if you let up on the insults and try to be a bit nicer, then they might listen. Hey, I did try a nice bit, and where did that get me? When we first met, I suggested to go to Atlan's, instead of those goblin-filled ruins. Shin could have easily transported us there. I gave them back their supplies. I helped Melissa with her problem with Conrad, despite her getting me involved without asking me. Heck, I even gave Meryl a rare relic to replace her darling jar. Not my fault. They ignored my advice. Melissa didn't even say thank you, and Meryl sold that hard-Nile jar for only 10 copper coins. Double quote left parenthesis 1 Ranma sighed again as he thought about the future of his new adventuring group and wondered just what new headaches were in store. Melissa could feel another headache coming on as she found herself face to face with a certain someone from her order. Isabel. Like Melissa, Isabel had come from a very prominent family, and had given up her wealthy lifestyle in order to pursue the more adventurous role of Miley Priestess. She had advanced quite quickly through the ranks and had achieved nearly the same status as Melissa, making herself her closest rival. Unlike Melissa, Isabel had longer tresses that were fashioned in curly locks. She had a slightly darker skin tone and her voice had a more snobbish, melodic tone to it. She was dressed in the traditional garb of the order, and her achievements in the Church of Miley were impressive. However, Melissa still outranked her, which made her somewhat jealous. Ironically, Isabel and Melissa both shared the same ideals about what a true hero was supposed to be, and were constantly in competition with each other. In nearly all of their contests, Melissa would always be on top, making Isabel even more frustrated and determined to best her. After her arrival had undergone the sacred ritual for a valiant champion to be chosen for her, Isabel had been all but infuriated at Melissa's success. However, she had noticed that Melissa had been brooding as of late, and she was curious as to the reason. Surely having a champion given to her by the great Miley would have made her ecstatic, so why wasn't she bragging about it? She hadn't even told anyone of his name. And why was she always coming in bruised, battered and dirtied lately? Isabel had decided at that point to find out. Well now, Melissa, it seems that you are to lead the tour groups and main rituals this year. Congratulations. Isabel said the last part with barely restrained resentment. Melissa nodded, as she put on a brave front to hide her secret shame. Under no circumstances would she allow her greatest rival to learn that Ranma was her champion. She'd never live that down. Yes, I am proud to serve the will of Miley. Speaking of the will of Miley, I have yet to meet your chosen hero. Who exactly is he? Melissa gulped as she shook her head. I am sorry to say that Miley did not, as of yet, revealed my champion to me during my ritual. Oh, what a pity. Secretly, Isabel was overjoyed that her rival had not been given a hero yet. That meant that there was still a chance to upstage her, since her own revelation ceremony was approaching. In fact, she was to undergo it this very day. She then gave a dainty shrug and turned to leave. Well, I'm certain that you will find your champion, just I will today. She then left the main temple hall, leaving Melissa to her thoughts. The lead disciple had hated to lie, but she just could not bring herself to admit that Ranma was her champion. It's against my will. It's against my will! Exclamation point greater than, well, I guess I'll go to the festival after all. Ranma sighed after some pleading and cajoling by his childhood friend. Eva smiled as she was looking forward to spending time with him. She hadn't been able to be with him very much since he had started adventuring with Melissa and her friends. Tomorrow was going to be a great day. The next day, the Festival of Miley was a greatly celebrated event in the Kingdom of Opham as the people milled about the various shops, displays and other spectacles. It was a joyous time that was looked forward to by most of the citizens as it only occurred once every 5 years. Not only did they honor the war god Miley, but the anniversary of the kingdom's founding was also commemorated. Many of the displays depicted the triumphs of the king and of the great heroes during that tumultuous time of war and reform. The members of the Order of Miley were all dressed in their best ceremonial robes and finery. The apprentices were mostly engaged in running the displays, while the elders and higher-ranking priestesses were involved in guiding groups of spectators through the dioramas. Among them was the lead disciple of the order, Melissa. She was none too happy when she saw Ranma touring the sights. As of yet, no one other than Ela, Jeannie, Meryl, Jenny and Master Carwes knew that he was her chosen hero. She just couldn't bring herself to admit that Ranma was the one Miley had decided that she should serve in every way. She shuddered at the thought of him demanding that of her. Fortunately for her, he had yet to take that liberty as his right as her valiant champion. Why couldn't he be a true champion? I deserve to have at least that much after all the years of service to Miley. If Ranma were even half the hero that the great part of Lodos is, then I would be content. But I suppose it is too much to ask. Greater than to Melissa continued to silently sulk over her current predicament, unaware that she was being watched by her three most devoted fans. The trio of apprentice priestesses saw how saddened their idol was as they tried to think of a way to cheer her up. They noted how agitated she was whenever she looked toward Ranma and correctly assumed that he was the source of her pain. Look at Melissa. I know that it's because of that guy who ruined our initiation at the temple. One of the three remarked. Her two companions nodded as they too nursed a grudge against Ranma, who had destroyed the temple of zombies, thereby ruining their sacred ceremony. Now they believed that Ranma had some kind of hold on their idol and decided to free Melissa from her bondage. The apprentices went off to plan for Ranma's downfall. Later. Will you stop that? Ranma ignored the rage being directed at him as he continued to chow down. Jeannie continued to glare at him after he had once again taken her meal without her even noticing it. Sitting at the table across from them, Gila played with Shin. During the Festival of Miley, members of the Sorcerer Guild were given free admission to all of the shows and displays. Jeannie had decided to keep an eye on Ranma as she knew that Melissa would be hosting the main attractions. She suspected that he would cause trouble for the Miley disciple and was ready to pound the arrogant magician at the slightest provocation. However, she didn't have the money to pay for the pricey admission fees, and only by claiming to be a part of his group could she avoid having to dole out any of her personal funds. Unfortunately for her, that meant having to suffer through the non-stop insults and his arrogant disregard for her hard-won battle skills. As for Illa, she was disappointed that she was not going to have Ranma all to herself, but Jeannie insisted that she accompany them. Before long, they were at each other's throats, but she was long used to Ranma's quirks and knew that the best way to handle this kind of situation was to stay out of it. Besides, he was more than capable of taking care of himself, and there was nothing Jeannie could possibly do to harm him. The Rune Soldier shrugged as he continued to eat. Hey, it's not my fault that you're about as quick as a box of rocks. Both physically and mentally, Miss, I can't fight without a weapon. Man, with your awareness and those slug-like reflexes, I'm surprised that the world hadn't robbed you blind by now. How would you like it if I took your food? Jeannie roared as she lunged for his bowl. However, Ranma easily foiled the attempt by stabbing out with his chopsticks, and using them to block her outstretched arm. Jeannie stared in shock as her wrist was firmly trapped between two skinny, frail-looking rods of wood. Amateur. Ranma snorted as he casually flicked upward with his chopsticks. Eva looked up in amazement as Jeannie was sent into Leto. She then questioned her companion. What kind of spell was that? No magic, Eva-chan. You know that I do the hocus pocus bit only when I have to. What you saw was just a trick I learned from an old freak. He used to do it to me all the time with his pipe. It took me a long while to figure out how he did it. He was a perverted old goat, but he did know of some pretty decent techniques. Ranma frowned slightly as an image of Raposa crossed his mind, then wiped it from his memory. Though he was fully aware of the impending danger that was lurking above him on a nearby rooftop, he continued to wolf down his food. In his mind, he started to count. Genie should be coming back down in about 5 seconds. Let's see. 5, 4 ... greater than on the roof of the restaurant and overlooking the table that Ranma and Eva were sitting at. The 3 disciples nodded as they prepared to dump a huge vat of refuse on top of the source of Melissa's pain. They had carefully planned for this moment to the last detail and nothing could go wrong. Ready? The first apprentice asked. All set. The second one replied. Counting down. The trio began counting down simultaneously. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Crash! Ranma smirked a bit as he heard a certain hotnet hit the roof of the restaurant and crashed through to the inside, taking 3 would-be attackers with her. His nose wrinkled a bit when he caught a whiff of whatever the 3 Miley disciples had planned to dump on him. Eva looked at him in shock and concern and asked, Ranma, don't worry about me as I can't fight without a weapon, Eva-chan. With all of the training I've given to her so far, she'll only have a couple 100 bruises and sniff. I can see a very long path in her near future. This is training. No worries, he insisted. Trust me, she'll be back to normal. Eventually. So let's check out what Ms. Know-Nothing Know-It-All is doing. Assured that Jeannie would be alright, Eva picked up Shin and followed her friend. In the rubble of the restaurant, the 3 apprentices moaned in pain and anguish. Their plan had failed and now the cat was going to see their idol Melissa. Lying nearby, Jeannie was in a state of disbelief as well as unbelievable pain. That bastard had defeated her with just a pair of twigs. She was going to kill him. Screw Melissa's oath to follow that jerk as her chosen hero. He had been nothing but trouble ever since they had met him. He never gave them a single shred of respect, especially with the Miley priestess and her. She growled at the memories of all the times Ranma had humiliated her in battle. Just who did he think he was? He wasn't anything what a true warrior was. He took every opportunity to scoff at her fighting abilities and didn't hesitate to show how ineffective her attempts to cause him bodily harm were. The next time they met she was going to annihilate him. In her seething rage, She did not consider one important aspect. She had survived an Ranma-style attack that would have killed a normal person, but was par for the course for the martial artists of Ranma's old life. What she didn't realize was that the beatdowns Ranma had been giving to her had actually begun toughening her up. Jeannie's endurance should be starting to increase substantially in about 5 months or so. Greater than the Rune Soldier thought as he and Mila walked toward the main exhibits of the festival. Though she won't be like big boys. I don't dare try to put her through the Bakusai Tenketsu training, at least not for a few years. Heck, it almost killed me and I had to redo all of my martial arts training. It would pulverize a non-martial artist. Greater than Ranma then began to think about his old life and wondered if he was missed. Then he decided that it was a moot point. It was not as if he was ever going to see any of those nutcases again. Right? Back in Ranma's home world, when Ranma had been transported away to the other world, he had also been sent back in time, according to properties of his wish to start over. As a result, though he had relived his childhood, very little time had passed in his original dimension. You sure this will work, great-grandmother? Shampoo asked as she prepared the mystic circle in which Cologne would cast her spell. The elder gave her great-granddaughter a bit of a nod, though she was still somewhat uncertain. This will most likely be the best chance that we have to find son-in-law, though I cannot guarantee 100% success. We shall have one chance, and one chance only. Hopefully, all will go according to plan. However, things were not going according to plan. A certain hidden weapons master was making his way to the only people who could foil the matriarch's plans and ensure that his beloved shampoo would be his. The Tendo Dojo. At the same time, a certain lost boy was making his way toward the Tendo Dojo. It had been some time since he and his lifelong rival had tangled and he was anxious to put his new training to the test. Of course, he was also looking forward to seeing Akan again. What he did not know was that Ranma had been missing for several days in this world. He then happened to look up and saw a familiar waterfowl fly overhead. He recognized the duck, since it was the only one he knew of that wore thick lens glasses. Huh? Wonder what Moose is doing here? ? Greater than high above. The duck quacked as he spotted the one he was looking for and headed toward him. He knew that Ryoju would be the best person to help him and going to the Tendo Dojo would be the place to find him, since he always ended up there after being lost for a while. At the Makoyadan, Cologne began chanting in an ancient tongue as she started weaving her spell on the fragment of the shattered pendant. Standing nearby, Shampoo anxiously waited for a moment in which she would be reunited with her Iron. In the center of the mystic circle they had prepared, the fragment glowed along with the ancient symbols that were drawn into the floor. If the spell was successful, then the Amazons would know the wish the pendant had granted to Ranma, and thereby have a clue to his whereabouts. Okay Moose, what do you want? Ryoga asked as he spoke with the nearsighted hidden weapons master. I need you to help foil Cologne's plan to find Ranma. Moose declared. Huh? You want me to go up against that old egg? The lost boy blanched a bit. He knew how formidable the matriarch was, and going up against her was akin to suicide. After all, she had trained him in the breaking point and was on a par with Rapo's eye skills. It's the only way to ensure Shampoo doesn't marry Ranma. Why should I care? If Ranma marries her, then that'll leave Akan for me. Ryoga took on a happy expression as he began to daydream of him and Akan together. He was rudely brought back to reality as Moose whacked him upside the head with a club that he pulled out from a sleeve. You took. If Ranma comes back, then that means he'll be engaged to Akan again. You don't want that now, do you? I guess not, but think about it. If Ranma returns, then things will go back to the way they were. That means you'll never get Akan, and I'll never get Shampoo. But if he doesn't come back, then that means we'll both win. Admit it, things would be a lot better if he didn't come back. He's the source of all of our troubles, right? Ryoga had to agree with that. If he had never met Ranma, then things would have turned out differently in his life. He would have never been dishonored when Ranma had only waited 3 days for their duel. He would have never followed him to China and gotten cursed by Jews and killed. And most of all, Ranma was the main obstacle to claiming his beloved Akan. What Moose was saying did make a lot of sense. Well, we don't have much time. That old witch is already starting the spell, and if we don't act now, Ranma will be back and you can kiss the only chance you have at winning Akan goodbye. Are you with me or not? The lost boy found himself torn. On one hand, he had the supreme opportunity to be rid of his rival and obstacle to Akan's heart. On the other hand, he would never be able to prove himself as Ranma's better. As much as he hated to admit it, that gender-bending jerk was the main reason why he trained so hard. Ever since junior high, he had always felt that he was second best, and from the Bread feud to the present day, Ryoga had worked hard to beat Ranma and show everyone, especially Akan, that he was no joke and was someone to be taken seriously. Well, Moose pressed. If you really want to be happy, then this is our last chance. That last quip pushed Ryoga to make his decision. To be happy. With Akan, he would send Ranma to hell. Okay, I'm in. The Amazon and the lost boy then ran off toward the Nakoyadan, neither one knowing that a certain someone had heard them from her bedroom window. Well, that's interesting. HMMM. I know a few people who would like to know about this information about Ranma. Greater than with that thought, Zabiki went to spread the word. For a price. The Cat Cafe. Shampoo became impatient as her great-grandmother continued to chant. Why was it taking so long? She wanted to see Ranma so much, and as soon as he appeared, she would drag him to the altar, and her thoughts were tabled as a bright light appeared before the matriarch. The pendant shard floated in midair as the spell reached its conclusion. Cologne nodded as she finished her chanting and then asked the shard, "What was the last wish you had granted?" There was a long, agonizing silence, and then the shard spoke. One had wished to start over without the problems of the present, so I sent him away to fulfill his request. Can you bring him back? I cannot undo a wish once it has been granted, the shard stated. More to the point, I now lack the power to grant wishes. Cologne pondered for a long while, considering her options. If what the shard stated was true, then wishing Ranma back was not possible. Besides, the shard lacked the power to grant another wish. That limited her options, but the elder was not one who gave up so easily. There had to be a way to find him. Then she remembered that she had certain items that might have enough mystical power for the shard to grant one last wish. And she would simply request that Ranma had never made his wish, therefore not violating the shard's restriction to never undo a wish. One cannot undo what never happened, right? As she made her preparations, she did not know that fate had other ideas. In the other world, Isabel was in a state of great anticipation as she entered naked into the sacred chamber of Miley and waded through the pool of revelation. She stood before the statue of the Lord God and began to pray. For a long time, there was absolute silence. Then her head came up as a psychic message was conveyed to her. Miley had spoken to her. She would find her chosen hero today. Her deity had promised a warrior of power and bravery. His courage and sense of honor would be unlike any other, and he would be the greatest hero the world would ever know. Isabel was in a state of elation when she heard of this proclamation. Finally, she would have something to gloat over her arrival. Surely, her chosen hero would far outshine anything that Melissa could ever achieve. And, according to the revelation, he would be the first man who rescues her from peril. What better way for a devoted of Miley to meet the greatest champion ever? She couldn't wait. She could only wonder who he would be. Meanwhile, Ranma and Eva headed toward the main exhibition hall where all the greatest displays of Ofugen's history were. Standing at the front entrance, Melissa looked down in dread as she saw her chosen hero approached. However, she steeled herself and took a deep breath. This was the sacred festival of Miley. Surely, not even Ranma would do anything to disrupt things and embarrass her. Right? Besides, she couldn't do anything, especially since Jenny was standing nearby on a balcony and watching. Welcome to the history of Ofugen. Melissa greeted as she put on a happy face. Ranma was of course not fooled by her obvious attempt to cover her shame, but he paid it no mind as he returned the greeting. Hey there, Miss Know-Nothing Know-It-All. I hear that the displays are a lot more interesting this time around. I'm sure that a devoted priestess of Miley would know all about them. So how's about a tour? Melissa just barely managed not to rear back with her right hand and slap him, as she kept up with her smile and led Ranma and Eva into the main hall. At that point, an old enemy stood near the outskirts of the city and snarled. Throughout his second life, Ranma had made a lot of enemies and his old adversary Kyle was at the top of the list. After that disastrous encounter in the elf village where Ranma had destroyed Kyle's dragon, The ex-apprentice of Ofun's Magic Academy had been plotting his revenge. He had been left in a sorry state after being on the receiving end of the dragon slave. Since that time, he had been wandering around the continent with only one thing on his mind: finding some means of destroying Ranma. Ever since the days at the academy, Kyle had always resented that regret that Carwes had picked up from the streets. However, the regret had surprised everyone with his uncanny ability to learn spells quickly, sometimes within hours or minutes after seeing them. During their days at the magic school, Kyle had strived to put that street rat in his place and show all just who was the prodigy of sorcery. Despite his best efforts, Ranma would always come up on top. It just wasn't fair. Kyle had come from a prestigious family of magic users, and that peasant was just a nobody. Well, today was going to be different. He would have his revenge against Ranma and show all just who was the best. After licking his wounds and a lot of searching, he had the means to obliterate his rival, once and for all. In the main exhibition hall, Ranma yawned. He had suspected that this was going to be boring, and with Melissa droning on and on about Ofun's history, it was doubly dull. And here we have the scene in which the mighty wizard Carwes and the warrior priestess Jenny, as they vanquished the terrible dragon and helped bring peace to the kingdom. Melissa proudly gestured to a huge statue of a dragon and the statues of the younger Carwes and Jenny. The wizard was in a pose casting a spell while Jenny was shown flying toward the dragon with sword extended out to slay the beast. Ranma yawned again, which caught the attention of Ila. In her arms was a slumbering Shin. "Ranma, aren't you impressed with Jenny and Carwes' heroic deeds?" The Rune Soldier shrugged. "Yeah. But it's not like I haven't heard this story 1,000 times before. And Jenny and Pops told me lots of times and I read about it at the Magic Academy's library. Besides, with all the adventures I've had, I can pretty much say that I've seen it all." At this point, Melissa became very insulted that Ranma would take this epic tale so lightly. This was a prime example of true heroism and he was treating it as if he was listening to an inventory list. HMPF. How dare you? Priestess Jenny and Midge Carwes were the great heroes of Ofun. They defeated a mighty dragon. In case you've forgotten, Melissa, so had I. Ranma pointed out. The mighty priestess was taken aback, then said, "That was different. You used magic to defeat it." Zila's friend casually pointed up at the figures of Carwes and Jenny. "Oh, and I suppose using levitation and protection spells against the dragon doesn't count? That's what Pops used to help Jenny fight it, right? It's not the same. They were fighting for justice and to bring peace to the land. And I thought to save a village of elves, even though they were planning to execute me. And you. But it's just not the same." "How is it not the same?" Ranma pressed in a simple tone. It just isn't." There was a quiet moment of silence as Ranma considered Melissa's logic, then suddenly burst out laughing. This, of course, caught both Ula and the mighty disciple by surprise. They stood in shock as they listened to him for a minute. Then Melissa got angry. "What are you laughing at?" Ranma snickered before responding. "You man, you remind me of an uncute girl I used to know, and I don't mean Ms. I can't fight without a weapon. Akan couldn't ever give me any good reasons why she was right and I was wrong, so she'd just say that it was and that was it. Damn, that really takes me back to that time in the Tenbo's bathroom." He then mimicked Akan's voice in a mocking tone. "Well, it's different when a boy looks at a girl. Fa 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 h. What are you talking about, Ranma? Who's this Akan?" Gila asked with some interest. This was one of those opportunities that he was talking about his past, and she wanted to get as much information as she could. Ranma managed to quiet down and replied, "Ah, she was just somebody I knew once. The thing is, my life was a real mess back then, and she was just one of the reasons why I'm glad I got away from that craziness." Her and some other dope would always say, "Ranma, prepare to die." Or anime, "Prepare to die." It was at that moment that the roof of the building was blown clear off in a massive explosion. Ranma reacted quickly and grabbed both women by the waist and leapt out of harm's way. Large chunks of debris came crashing down as he nimbly avoided them and got them to a relative safe area just near the entrance. Just as he set them down, he heard a scream and looked over his shoulder. A massive section of wall was starting to collapse and an innocent bystander was about to be crushed. Reacting with incredible speed, the Rune Soldier was across the room and swept up the woman an instant before a section of wall crashed down. Leaping high, he avoided several more chunks of debris, then bounded toward Melissa and Neela. "You saved me." He looked down at the person he had just rescued and noticed that she was similarly dressed like Melissa. He saw the crest of Miley on her blouse and realized that he had just saved another priestess of the war god. "Are you alright?" Isabel blushed as she felt the hard muscle of his arms, then knew at that instant that she had found the one she had been promised by Miley to serve. "My hero. Sorry, miss. Can't talk right now. I'm going to have to put you down, 'cause I got a deal with a sore head." With those words, he gently set down Isabel near Melissa and Neela, then looked up to see a huge monstrosity towering above. He growled a bit as he recognized a certain someone who was standing on the right shoulder of the biggest golem he had ever seen. He also noticed that his old rival had an ugly scar on his right cheek. Kyle smirked as he looked down at his adversary. "We meet again, street rat." Ranma responded in the same tone. Well, if it isn't the fifth-rate one, Abe. What do you want this time, Kyle? "I would think that it would be obvious, Ranma," Kyle shouted out. "I lost much since our last encounter. You destroyed my dragon. You cost me a fortune in magic wood and a chance to have the most powerful staff in the world. I had a lot of prospective buyers for that enchanted tree, and when I couldn't deliver, they made me suffer. Because of you, you've seen hell, yeah, yeah, I know. Ranma sighed as it was near him all over again. And he had once thought Ryoga had been a nuisance. And that's why you decided to stick this walking paperweight against me. Geez, Kyle. I would have thought by now you'd know that your golems don't mean squat to me. Oh, this golem is far different from the ones you used to destroy back at the academy. Kyle sneered. Ranma looked over the stone monster standing before him and noted the large purple gem in the forehead. It was oval-shaped and was about the size of a football. Yeah, I suppose that not all golems are made with a charisma crystal. So you recognize it. Good. Then you know that this is one golem that you cannot possibly defeat. After all this time, I shall finally destroy you. Ranma, Gila cried out. But crystal is one of the elemental relics of the ancients. Yeah, I kind of figured that much, Gila-chan. BCKUSAITNKDDSU. Ranma leapt high, and stabbed forth with his right index finger at the monster's chest. KBOM. The golem's chest broke apart from the breaking point technique. Fragments of stone rained down on the floor of the exhibition hall. It looked as if the fight was over. However, as Ranma was dusting himself off, the crystal glowed, causing the pieces of rock to rise up and fly back to the hole in the golem's chest. The shards melted back in place, leaving the monster whole again. The Rune Soldier paused to rethink his battle strategy. Kyle let off a scornful laugh as he knew he had the perfect weapon against his lifelong foe. This time, that stupid earth spell was absolutely useless. Vengeance would finally be his. Ranma shrugged, then addressed Kyle. So I'm guessing that crystal gives your golem the power to regenerate itself. No matter how much I break it down, it'll always reform itself. That's right, Street Rat. There's no possible way you can destroy my creation this time. Now, destroy him. The golem lashed out with a huge fist. Ranma nimbly dodged the attack and landed a few meters away. He showed no concern or worry. In fact, it looked as if he was having fun. And here I thought the Miley Festival was gonna be dull. The Rune Soldier commented as he reached behind him with his left hand and produced a small, round object. He held it aloft and let his opponent see it. HMPF. You are even more of a fool than I thought. Kyle continued to scoff. You don't seriously expect that copper coin will stop me, do you? Ranma snickered a bit as he replied. That crystal on your golem's head, I got to admit, it's pretty powerful. You probably went through a lot of trouble to get it, right? You either spent a lot of gold or stole it, huh? Kyle puffed himself up as he replied with pride. That's right, Street Rat. I went through hell to get it, and that's exactly where I'm going to send you. My golem is unstoppable. It cannot be destroyed. With the crystal powering it, it is invincible. Fa 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 fa. Crack. The sorcerer stopped in his tirade when he heard that noise. He looked up and saw that the crystal in the monster's forehead now had something embedded within the center. His eyes widened as he saw that it was the coin that Ranma had been holding. On the ground, Ranma smirked. Utilizing the speed of the chessman technique, he had thrown the metal object with the force of a bullet. His projectile had pierced the fragile crystal's surface and was now releasing the key that he had stored within it. Kyle's jaw dropped as the crystal split in half where the needle was embedded. His face turned white as he watched the two halves fall off and shatter into 100 pieces when they hit the ground. Immediately, his golem became inactive as its main source of energy was gone. Ranma, with his hands behind his back, casually walked up to the monster's feet. He stopped about a foot away from the golem's right leg, then looked back up at Kyle. "So tell me, Kyle, is your golem still invincible without that crystal?" At that point, he extended his left arm with the index finger pointing out. Timber. With its right leg blown out from under it, the golem tilted over and came crashing down. On the building, the front of the exhibition hall came down, crushing all of the displays and statues. Everything was flattened as Kyle's dreams of revenge came tumbling down. Ranma nimbly dodged the fallen debris and made certain that he and the others were safe. Seeing that they were in an area that was not close to the carnage, he nodded and looked over to where Kyle had fallen. His rival painfully rose to his feet with a look of rage in his eyes. "You'll all pay for this." The former Ranma inhabitant shrugged and said, "And you owe me 1 copper coin." It was then that he started to crack his knuckles. After a very brief, but very violent episode, Kyle was taken away by the palace guards, while Ranma, Eva and Melissa stood outside the now demolished exhibition hall. Melissa, of course, was none too happy. "You idiot! You destroyed all of the displays and ruined the festival," the Miley priestess cried out. "This was supposed to have been a great honor and that poor ruined it." "Hey, it wasn't my fault, Ms. Know-Nothing Know-It-All," Ranma shot back. "You want to blame somebody? Blame Kyle and his golem. He started it, and I finished it. End of story. I can't believe this happened. This was supposed to be the most sacred event of the Church of Miley, and you have to go and saved my life. Oh, thank you." Both turned to see Isabel running toward them with an ecstatic expression. She stopped and knelt down on one knee while bowing her head reverently. "Brave sir who rescued me, might I know the name of my valiant champion?" "Your what?" Melissa exclaimed in disbelief. "I don't like the way this sounds ... greater than Ranma thought." Excuse me," Eva said. "Did I just hear you call Ranma your valiant champion? You're a priestess of Miley, right? Does that mean that he's supposed to be your chosen hero?" "Yes. By the divine hand of Miley himself, I was guided to this wonderful man to serve. I am Isabel and No, this cannot be," Melissa said in total protest. Isabel looked at her rival with a smug expression. "Come now, Melissa. Surely you cannot be jealous that I have found my chosen hero, are you? He can't be your chosen hero. And why not? Melissa couldn't bring herself to say that Ranma was her chosen hero. It would be too shameful. However, she didn't have to say it. Eva did it for her. I thought Ranma was Melissa's chosen hero. Does this mean that you both have to serve him? At this time, Melissa was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Not only was she trapped to serving this boorish, ill-mannered oaf, but now it seemed that she would have to do so alongside her greatest rival. Her body trembled and she shook her head in denial. Finally she let it all out. This is against my will. To be continued. Author's notes: I was actually a bit stuck on writing this episode, and I give thanks to a few pre-readers for giving me this idea, which fits in with the rest of the story that I had planned for Rune Soldier Ranma. I expect it to last some 20 or so episodes. In any case, things are going to get even crazier as Melissa and Isabel become down to Ranma and more hijinks are on the way. As for the new Ranma wrecking crew, I decided to let one or two join him on this world. Which one? Well, that's the secret. In the next episode, Ranma will have to deal with a deranged sorcerer, two bickering priestesses, an old elf friend, and him. See you there.